We're on? Okay. Welcome to the 9th hearing of the Public Accountability Committee's inquiry into the appointment of Mr John Barilaro as Senior Trade Investment Commissioner to the Americas. The inquiry is examining the circumstances leading up to the appointment of the various commissioners, including the processes, probity and integrity measures undertaken. I acknowledge the Gadigal people of the Eora Nation, the traditional custodians on the lands on which we are meeting today. I pay my respects to elders past and present and celebrate the diversity of Aboriginal peoples and their ongoing cultures and connections to the lands and waters of New South Wales. I also acknowledge and pay my respects to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people joining us today. Today, we will be hearing from one witness, Mr Stephen Cartwright, Agent General UK, Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner, Europe and Israel, Investment New South Wales. I thank Mr Cartwright for making the time to give evidence to this important inquiry. Before we commence, I'd like to make some brief comments about the procedures for today's hearing. Today's hearing is being broadcast live via the Parliament's website. A transcript of today's hearing will be placed on the committee's website when it becomes available. In accordance with the broadcasting guidelines, the House has authorised the filming, broadcasting and photography of committee proceedings by representatives of media organisations from any position in the room and by any member of the public from any position in the audience. Any person filming or photographing proceedings must take responsibility for the proper use of that material. This is detailed in the broadcasting resolution, a copy of which is available from the Secretariat. While parliamentary privilege applies in New South Wales to witnesses giving evidence today, it does not apply to what witnesses say outside of their evidence at the hearing. I therefore urge witnesses to be careful about comments you may make to the media or to others after you complete your evidence. All witnesses have a right to procedural fairness according to the Procedural Fairness Resolution adopted by the House in 2018. If witnesses are unable to answer a question today and want more time to respond, they can take a question on notice. Written answers to questions taken on notice are to be provided within 21 days. Finally, could everyone please turn their mobile phones to silent for the duration of the hearing? So I welcome our witness. Mr Cartwright, could you please state your name, the capacity in which you are appearing today, and swear either an oath or affirmation from the cards that have been emailed to you from the Secretariat?
Good morning to you, Chair, and the rest of the committee. My name is Stephen Cartwright. I'm the New South Wales Agent General to the United Kingdom and the New South Wales Senior Trade and Investment Commissioner to Europe and to Israel. I'll just swear the affirmation. I solemnly, sincerely and truly declare and affirm that the evidence now about to be given by me shall be the truth, the whole truth and nothing but the truth.
Thank you, Mr Cartwright, and I understand you have a statement to make, and I just at the outset just thank you for making the time to appear today, which I understand is 9 p.m. Monday time, and it's why we're all here bright and early at 8 a.m. on Tuesday to hear from you, which was a compromise in the end. So thank you. If you'd like to begin with your opening statement, which I understand there should be a copy made available to us shortly.
Yes, there should be somebody from the department able to provide a copy,
It is
Chair.
Wednesday, yes. Thank you, Daniel.
I'd like to thank the committee for the opportunity to make this statement to the inquiry. Like the committee, I share a strong desire to ensure that an accurate account of the facts surrounding my appointment is established, and I would ask the committee's indulgence to allow me to take a little longer than the usual period that's allowed to read the statement, because it details important facts in chronological order which will be helpful to the committee. I would also point out that as a public servant, I've been prevented until now by the terms of my employment from making any public statements to either clarify factual matters and or to protect my reputation. I'm therefore grateful for the opportunity to assist with the committee's investigations. Before presenting the chronology of my appointment, I would like to make some brief opening remarks about the merit of my selection for the role of Agent General to the United Kingdom. I am not, nor have I ever been, a member of, affiliated with, or associated in any way with any political party, other than indirectly when I was a member of the Miners' Union, when I worked in underground coal mines for 5 years during the 1980s. My career prior to my current role has been in the private sector, as both an employee and as a successful entrepreneur and business owner. And I would estimate that my personal and business contributions to the New South Wales government have been in excess of $30 million in terms of payroll tax and stamp duties. I have over 20 years' experience as a Chief Executive Officer of large and complex private, public and not-for-profit organisations with overseas operations, including an ASX-listed firm with operations in the UK. Prior to commencing in my current role, I had never worked for any government other than as a member or chairman of a government advisory board. My prior executive and board roles necessitated the development of professional relationships with politicians, local, state and federal, across the whole political spectrum, as well as with their staff and with senior public servants. In my role as the CEO of the New South Wales Business Chamber from July 2009 onwards, I regularly engage with public servants, as well as with premiers, treasurers, ministers, shadow ministers and members of the crossbench. This direct engagement, especially during the recent challenges of the New South Wales bushfires, floods and the COVID pandemic, enabled me to work with and assist government to navigate these difficult circumstances. While CEO of the New South Wales Business Chamber, I also successfully built an international trade consultancy to help New South Wales small to medium enterprises secure customers offshore. I built this trade support capability because Austrade is not really set up to provide this type of dedicated trade support, and because back then the New South Wales government had no such dedicated offshore trade staff to assist them. This firm provided direct advice, support and export documentation services to New South Wales companies exporting to all parts of the world, including the UK, Europe and Israel, but it also employed dedicated trade specialist staff in Sydney and Shanghai, working as a single team to help New South Wales SMEs find new customers in China when that country was a booming market for New South Wales exporters. This onshore-offshore trade model has now been adopted by Investment New South Wales, and it is the operating model which is now being successfully rolled out around the world. I've also been a member of a number of boards with an international trade dimension, including as chairman of a fast-growing software company that expanded into the US, and as chairman of the New South Wales Government International Education Advisory Board. I was also the vice president of the Peak Global Business Organisation, the International Chamber of Commerce, WCF, which is headquartered in Paris from 2018 to 2020. I led successful business trade missions to China and Japan and led Australian delegations to international business conventions in Mexico, Qatar, US, China, Italy and Brazil. My employment background, successful business history, international trade experience and strong commitment to the state of New South Wales are, in my view, the reasons for my selection by the independent panel as the successful candidate for the UK Agent General role. The evidence provided to this inquiry by respected panel members Mr Tim Reardon, Mr Mike Pratt and Mr Warwick Smith is that my selection as the best candidate for the Agent General role was based purely on merit. The chronologies which I will now provide, which I hope will assist the committee, are based on my best recollections and on records that I hold. In terms of the recruitment process, after I completed my term as the CEO of the New South Wales Business Chamber in September 2020, I took a sabbatical over the spring-summer months before commencing the search for my next leadership role in February 2021. However, in December 2020, I was approached by New South Wales Minister, the Honourable Dr Jeff Lee, and asked if I would consider taking on the role of Chairman of New South Wales TAFE. The Minister was well aware that I had a keen interest in improving vet outcomes in New South Wales, that I understood the policy settings associated with this challenge, and that I had practical experience as well, with the New South Wales Business Chamber operating a group training company and managing 40,000 apprentices under the largest federal government apprenticeship support program in the nation. The Minister was also aware that I had recently completed my term as the Chairman of the New South Wales Government's International Education Advisory Board. I was very interested in this important TAFE chairmanship role, and discussions concerning my possible appointment continued through January, February and into March. Ultimately, I was unable to accept the TAFE chairmanship role due to my application for the role as the New South Wales Agent General to London. On the 17th of February 2021, I attended a coffee meeting which had been requested by the then Deputy Premier, John Barilaro. The Deputy Premier had asked me if I could introduce him to a board member from the New South Wales Business Chamber. After that board member left us, the Deputy Premier asked me if I might be interested in the UK Agent General role. I was taken by complete surprise by his question, because I had not heard much about the role since it was announced by Premier Berejiklian back in 2019 as part of the Global New South Wales Strategy announcement. During this conversation, the Deputy Premier asked me what package I had been on at the Chamber. And I told him that my base was about $650,000 and that for the past few years, my annual bonuses had been about $150,000. That is a total of about $800,000. The Deputy Premier then said that the New South Wales Government would probably be offering a base in the low fives, that is just above $500,000, plus the usual support for offshore trade roles such as the payment of rent and school fees. That is the same as for Austrade and for some of the other states. He said that the government was keen to attract high calibre people from the private sector who understood business and trade, who were passionate about New South Wales and who knew how to get business deals done. I said that the role sounded interesting, but that I needed to discuss it with my wife, as it was a very significant decision for our family to move to the other side of the world, especially with children still at school and elderly parents to consider. So I said that I would let him know as quickly as possible. We agreed to meet again the next day, so on the 18th of February 2021, I met with the Deputy Premier in his office in Parliament House and I told him that I was interested in the role. He then made it clear during the meeting that he would immediately let the external recruiter know of my interest, that there was an established independent recruitment process to be followed, and that he would not have any further involvement in the process. I was comfortable with this, and I never once contacted him, spoke to him, or heard from him again during the 5-month recruitment process. Indeed, other than my conversations with Minister Lee concerning the chairmanship of TAFE, I did not contact, speak to, or hear from any other politician during the 5-month recruitment process. On the 19th of February 2021, I had a previously postponed coffee catch-up with Treasury Secretary Mike Pratt to seek his advice on my broader career opportunities. I had served under Mr Pratt on the Advisory Board of Service New South Wales for 4 years and held him in very high regard, so I was seeking his advice on career options that I was considering. During this discussion, I did ask him about the UK Agent General role, as it was a role within Treasury. Mr Pratt gave me some general information about the role and about the Global New South Wales project, and he encouraged me to throw my hat in the ring for the UK Agent General role, as he thought I would be a great candidate. I did briefly discuss some of my challenges, such as my children's schooling and my elderly parents, but he indicated that these were matters that could likely be resolved. On the 20th of February 2021, I was contacted by Dr. Marianne Broadbent from NGS Global, who explained that her firm was recruiting several international roles for Treasury and that she'd been given my name by the New South Wales Government as a potential applicant for the UK Agent General role. Dr. Broadbent sent me an information pack on the role, which pleasingly showed that the role would report directly to Treasury Secretary Mike Pratt, but concerningly showed that the salary package on offer was $450,000. On the assumption that this base would be complemented with support for rent and school fees, as per my earlier discussion with the Deputy Premier, I sent Dr. Broadbent my application letter and my CV on the 22nd of February 2021. On the 25th of February 2021, I had an initial Zoom interview with Dr. Broadbent to discuss my suitability for the role. I can only assume that the interview went well, because I was later advised by Dr. Broadbent that I would be progressing to a formal panel interview in March. On the 30th of March 2021, I attended a panel interview at 52 Martin Place. The panel comprised Mr. Mike Pratt, Mr. Tim Reardon, Mr. Warwick Smith and Ms. Jenny West. Later that same day, I received a follow-up email from Dr. Broadbent saying that the panel interview had gone very well and that the government would be progressing to the reference checking stage of the process. She flagged that Ms. Jenny West from Investment New South Wales would set up a time with me to discuss the role in greater detail. On the 31st of March 2021, I emailed Dr. Broadbent to share with her in confidence the details of the initial conversation that I'd had with the Deputy Premier back in February concerning the probable size and structure of a package for the UK Agent General role, and I asked for her guidance on how best to raise this with Ms. West, because I wasn't sure if that information had found its way to her or not. In the email, I asked Dr. Broadbent for her help because I didn't want to be accused of being unrealistic or playing hardball in the negotiations. Later that morning, Dr. Broadbent emailed me to say that I should be assured that those who interviewed me yesterday were aware of my situation and that this subject matter was the thrust of the post-interview discussion. Later that day, I received an email from Ms. West asking me to set up a date for another Zoom call, and on the 1st of April, we had that call to discuss the role in more detail. On the 14th of April 2021, I contacted Ms. West to seek an update on progress, and some hours later, I was sent an email from Dr. Broadbent, which read as follows. Stephen, following discussions with Investment New South Wales and New South Wales Treasury officials, we understand that the following arrangements will be put in place, subject to final confirmation from Investment New South Wales at this stage. Salary and super package of $600,000. significant contribution to accommodation, understanding that a well-located 3-bedroom residence is required, appropriate temporary accommodation till longer-term arrangements are located, significant contribution to school fees for dependent children, reasonable relocation expenses, reasonable travel between the UK and Sydney as required. I replied to Dr. Broadbent by email later that same day, and I said that subject to a few clarifications, I was happy with the offer. There was then a long period of no contact from anyone, but about 4 weeks later, in early May, I received a phone call from Dr. Broadbent, during which I noticed a difference in her tone. She said that the earlier offer made to me in her email on 14 April had now been withdrawn, that the offer was reduced to a flat amount of $600,000, and that I could take it or leave it. I asked her what had changed since the 14th of April, but Dr. Broadbent said there was nothing to discuss. It was a last and final offer. I explained to Dr. Broadbent that she had no cause to be short with me, as I had never made any demands. And I pointed out that the withdrawn offer was the one that she had sent to me on behalf of her client. I said that despite the strangeness of the situation, I was open to considering the reduced amount and would discuss it with my wife. I asked for the new offer to be sent to me in an email. A day or so later, I advised Dr. Broadbent that I was prepared to continue with the process. On the 19th of May 2021, I met Miss Amy Brown for the first time via a Zoom call. By this date, the salary package being discussed was already agreed at $600,000 all inclusive. Accordingly, insofar as Miss Brown may have given evidence to the committee that I demanded that she agree to a package of $800,000, and further that I made various alleged threats to her about escalating my demands for such a package to the Minister, Deputy Premier or Premier, these claims are inconsistent with the chronology, which shows that by the time we first met, a package of that size was beyond anyone's contemplation, including my own. On the 2nd of June 2021, Ms. Jenny West sent me an email containing a table created by Deloitte, which showed the agreed $600,000 base package with a once-off $60,000 relocation allowance. On the 21st of June 2021, I received another email from Ms. West apologising for the ongoing delay in the start for the UK Agent General role. She told me that everything had to be approved by Cabinet and that due to other more urgent matters, the approval could not be put on the Cabinet agenda until the 19th of July, almost 1 month later, after which it had to be signed off by the New South Wales Governor, thus delaying my start date until 26 July. On or around the 5th of July 2021, I received a phone call from Ms. West asking me for a favour. She asked if I would be okay with breaking up the agreed $600,000 base salary into two parts, $487,000 base and $113,000 allowance. She explained that if I agreed to do this favour for Investment New South Wales, then they would not need to make a special application to the Remuneration Tribunal because my base would fit within the appropriate public sector band. This was the third version of the offered package, but I was happy to help out my new employer if I could, so I told Ms. West that so long as I still got the agreed $600,000 in my pay packet each month, then I didn't really mind how it was categorised. Ms. West said that she understood and that she was very grateful for my assistance. On the 8th of July 2021, I received drafts of my employment contract and relocation letter for my review. I was pleased to finally have received these drafts, as they were originally supposed to be sent to me in the week commencing the 28th of June. On the 11th of July, I sent an email to Ms. West and set out all of my questions and concerns with the drafts. It was clear to me that much of the draft contract contained boilerplate text used in standard employment contracts for public servants working in New South Wales. So I responded with a considerable number of questions and requested amendments. I was aware that I was one of the first senior executives to be hired to head up an offshore hub, so I assumed that some modifications to the standard clauses would be required. Not knowing who had the authority to approve such modifications, I indicated to Ms. West that I was happy to discuss my concerns or requests with Amy, with Tim, or the Premier, if that's what was required, but I finished by making it clear that I was happy to leave it to Ms. West to decide what would work best in the circumstances. In the end, all matters were resolved, and on the 23rd of July 2021, I signed my employment contract, and on the 26th of July 2021, I commenced my employment within the Investment New South Wales. Now, just finishing by touching on matters that occurred after my employment commenced. When I commenced in my new role, I was 4 layers down in the public service, despite my original job description saying I would be reporting directly to the Treasury Secretary, and despite the fact that my employment contract specified very clearly under the heading Key Relationships that I was to consult with the Premier, the Treasurer, the Deputy Premier and the Office of the Minister to provide insights, accurate information and timely responses to key issues. When I started in my new role, I was reporting to Ms West, who was reporting to the CEO of Investment New South Wales, Ms Brown, who was reporting to the Secretary of Premier and Cabinet, Mr Reardon. I was concerned about my ability to fulfil my obligations to consult with senior ministers, especially once I was posted to London, where big investment opportunities might be confidential and time sensitive. However, early in my time with the government, I had a one-on-one meeting with Minister Ayres, and he gave me his mobile phone number and told me that I could reach out to him directly if ever I needed to. I promised that I would only do so as a last resort, but I was grateful for this show of support and access by the Minister. Several weeks after I started in my new role, I received my first pay slip. I immediately contacted HR because the base salary had been paid but not the allowance, and there was a $10,000 per month difference. I assumed that the allowance would be paid separately. However, the head of HR said that my contract was clear, that the allowance was not to be paid until I was in the United Kingdom. Given that it had been agreed that I would not move to the United Kingdom until January 2022, due to, first of all, a requirement to wait several months until my role was approved by the UK government, secondly, border closures due to COVID, and thirdly, the requirement for my children to finish the school year, I was facing a shortfall of about $56,000 compared to what I had agreed to when I was asked by Ms West to do the agency a favour and split the $600,000 base package into two parts. I assumed the error in my pay was just a case of miscommunication. So I escalated this to Ms West, who was the first person, who was the person who had asked me for the favour, but she said that regardless of what had been agreed to, there was nothing she could do about it because the employment contract was clear. I made it clear to Ms West that this was not an acceptable outcome. However, in an attempt to find a way forward, I suggested that if we couldn't get the contract fixed to reflect the deal she asked me to do, I could instead fly to the UK in October after my appointment had been officially approved by the UK government to set up the office, recruit staff, meet with key contacts and investors, and generally commence building the UK-EU capability, but that I would then need to return toward the end of the year to pack up the house and move my family. Ms West advised me that I could choose to do that or choose not to do that. It was totally up to me. But if I chose to go to the UK in October, then my flights, accommodation and meals in the UK and my 2 weeks quarantine when I returned would all be at my own expense, a cost I estimated to be around $30,000 and which I was unwilling to incur. Discussions on the allowance payment issue went backwards and forwards for weeks, and then on the 23rd of October 2021, I decided to escalate the matter, so I sent a long email to Ms Brown providing her with the complete background to the problem, and I requested her support to find a solution that was equitable. I pointed out that at Ms West's request, I had agreed to help out the agency by splitting my salary package, but that I was now facing a loss of $56,000 in return for my help. I explained that I was already incurring UK expenses associated with my move, and I requested that I should at least be able to book these against the UK allowance. Ms Brown, in an email back to me, rejected my request for any consideration and said that she had just spent the day in budget estimates, where it was made clear that the issue of offshore expenses would be subject to ongoing scrutiny by the upper house. She said that she was sorry that it wasn't the answer I was looking for. I replied to her with another email on the 27th of October 2021, and I explained that I was keen to get her advice on the next steps available to me to have the issue resolved. I said that I was happy to discuss it with the Public Service Commissioner, Katrina Lowe, who had offered to help me with any issues I had relating to working in the public service, or Secretary Coates-Trotter, as he was Ms Brown's boss, or even the Minister or the Premier, because the outcome was simply not what I had agreed to, and it needed someone with sufficient authority to fix it. The next day, Ms Brown and I met in the office at 52 Martin Place to continue our discussion on the matter, along with the agency's General Counsel, Mr. Chris Carr, who had dialed in on the phone. It was clear that Ms Brown wanted me to just accept her position and to drop the issue. She admonished me for requesting in my email the previous day that we take the matter to her boss or higher, suggesting that by requesting this, I was acting in bad faith. I denied that I was acting in bad faith and responded by saying that asking me to agree to something to help out the agency and then reneging on that deal was actually a better example of an act of bad faith. In the end, Ms Brown refused to escalate the matter and I simply had to accept the loss. I did not take it any further with her boss or any minister. I have had to accept that I am now $56,000 out of pocket. Ms Brown travelled to London for a work matter between the 7th to the 11th of February this year, and I was pleased that I found out that she was coming, as I wanted to show her how the office was only half furnished and to seek her help to get approval for some desks, because we'd been told by head office that there was no budget for furniture, and to introduce her to some of her new staff that had recently joined us, including Mr Paul Webster, who was joining as the Trade and Investment Commissioner for the region and who was keen to meet her. I also wanted to meet with Ms Brown while she was in London to discuss a number of other issues, including my earlier request to have my rent paid directly by the government, that is, deducted from my UK allowance, as this is the way that some of the other state governments provide accommodation for their agents general in London, and the same way that Austrade provides accommodation for their senior trade staff in London. I made it clear when I met Ms Brown at Heathrow Airport on her arrival that we needed to meet, but I got no response during the whole week and no meeting ever occurred. On the 14th of February 2022, I received an email from Ms Kylie Bell which read, "Good news, I had a quick debrief with Amy on a few things this morning and she is comfortable with us amending your package to pay the accommodation directly, and if you wanted to go after that apartment today when you wake up, go for it." However, final confirmation of this approved change was never received, and the issue of my rent support bounced around inside head office for another month or so. I urgently needed to find a permanent home to rent, as I had been living in a small hotel room away from my family for months. The cost of this hotel room was covered by my relocation expenses for the first 3 months, but that allowance was about to expire, so I needed to find a home. In the end, because of the prevarication, I sent a message to Minister Ayres, as he had invited me to do if ever I needed to explain what other states and Austrade were doing in terms of rental support and to ask for his help to have the matter resolved. Soon after I had sent this message to the Minister, I heard that a report had been created by Ms Kylie Bell which benchmarked New South Wales against Austrade and the other states, and as a result of that report, I was then advised by Ms Brown in a letter dated 8 June 2022 that my request for direct rent payment had been granted. I signed the variation to my employment contract on the 16th of June 2022 and moved into a small 2-bedroom flat immediately. I thank the committee for allowing me to make this opening statement.
Thank you very much, Mr Cartwright. We'll go straight to questions from the opposition now, starting with Mr Daniel Mookie.
Thank you, Chair, and welcome, Mr Cartwright. I just seek confirmation that you can hear me.
Yes, I can, Mr Mookie, thank you. I was just having a drink of water.
Thank you. And Mr Cartwright, can I first thank you for taking the opportunity to join us at the late hour in London. It really is appreciated. And also, can I say thank you for preparing such an extensive opening statement. It has been quite helpful in that respect. Can I just ask at first instance, to the best of your recollection, the opening statement that you have given is a complete account of events as you see them?
It's a complete account of what I believe to be the most relevant and most pertinent of the events. There was a lot of things that occurred during that time period that I covered, and that would have taken 50 pages of statement to cover every small matter that occurred. But I tried to, I think, select the key facts that I believe are matters that are being considered by the committee.
Thank you, Mr Cartwright. And again, very much appreciate the thoroughness of your preparation ahead of your appearance this morning our time and evening yours. Can I just start with some preliminary questions? You were the CEO of Business New South Wales for how long?
I was CEO from July 2009 till September 2020.
And is there any particular reason why you ceased to be the CEO in September 2020?
I resigned my position because after 11 years I felt that it was time for a change.
Fair enough, Mr Cartwright. And just to be clear here, Business New South Wales remains one of the most respected organisations in the state when it comes to the business view. So I just want to be clear about that. You do, you say in your opening statement in the course of that relationship, course of your service as CEO of Business New South Wales, you effectively did develop relationships with various political figures. I understood that correctly?
Yes, that's right.
And that included the current Premier?
Yes.
And that included the former Deputy Premier?
Yes.
Did you develop a personal friendship with any of those two?
No, I don't have any personal friendships with any politicians.
But you did, for example, have access to the the then Treasurer's phone number in time to send him a birthday message in September of 2021?
I had mobile phone numbers given to me by many people in government and in the public service and in the shadow ministry and crossbench because it was deemed that it was a way of being able to reach out and make contact in relation to matters that were going on. So,
and there's nothing inappropriate
yes,
with that, Mr. Cartwright, but it is the case that you did sort of, for example, you did have a sufficient relationship to the point where you were sending birthday messages to the now Premier last year, just as he was becoming Premier, didn't you?
I did send him, I did wish him happy birthday, and I finished that message by telling him I was looking forward to getting over to London to start my role as the Agent General.
You did. And just one issue, just in respect to your service in Business New South Wales, in the 2019 state election campaign, you did authorise an extensive advertising campaign directed against the Labor Party, didn't you?
No, I did not.
And you did, in that advertising campaign, you drew attention to a Labor policy that you felt wasn't in the interest of business, though.
No, let me be clear about this, Mr. Mookie. The New South Wales Business Chamber is an apolitical organisation and fiercely apolitical. It has been for almost 200 years since it was first started when New South Wales was a small colony. And the position that the New South Wales Business Chamber takes in relation to any particular policy, be that a government policy, an opposition policy or a crossbench policy, is determined by peak policy committees of the members. So they determine the Chamber's position on those matters. Any political campaigning is done in accordance with campaign regulations in New South Wales. So there is an appointed executive who's responsible for authorising all campaign material, and that was never me. That was somebody else in the organisation. And the Board of Directors of the New South Wales Business Chamber signs off on the campaign funding, understanding what that campaign funding is to be used for. So it's not right to say that I authorised it. I didn't. And it was my job as the CEO to explain the terms of what the members were concerned about. And toward the end of the pre-election period, before every election when I was the CEO at least, we put out a scorecard which looked at the policies that we wanted the government and the opposition to endorse before the election, and we then let the voters decide how they would interpret that scorecard that was put out.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. I won't push it much further than that. Can we now turn to your interest in the Agent General's role? You say you did not become interested in the Agent General's role until you were approached by the former Deputy Premier John Barilaro on about the 17th of February 2021. Did I understand that correctly?
That's right. Yes.
And that was the first time that you were notified that there was this role available that you might be an appropriate candidate for.
Yes, I'd heard about the role when Premier Berejiklian announced it back in 2019, but it came as a complete surprise to me when the Deputy Premier said to me during that coffee meeting, would I be interested? Came out of left field for me.
And so just to be clear, prior to that meeting you say which took place on the 17th of February, you did not have any conversations with Mr. Barilaro before that?
That's exactly right.
And you didn't have any conversations with Treasurer Perrottet?
No, never discussed it with Treasurer Perrottet.
And you didn't have any discussions with Secretary Pratt as of the 17th of February 2021?
As of that date, no.
Okay, thank you. Do you by any chance happen to have the documents that have been provided to you?
I just had them all printed out and the last ones have just been handed to me. So
thank you, Mr. Cartwright. Do you mind turning to page 8 of the tender bundle?
Yeah. Yes.
Just to be clear, your best recollection of your conversation with the Deputy Premier on the 2021 meeting on the 17th of February is that he said the Deputy Premier would be probably offering a base in the low fives. Is that what he said?
Yes.
And
yes. Well, I think to be fair, Mr. Mookie, he might have said the government would be looking at that kind of package. He wasn't definitive. He was sort of saying this is what we're thinking.
Did he say to you that the current package on offer was not attracting the right calibre of candidate?
What he said was that the government felt that in order to get somebody of sufficient gravitas, that they probably needed to move more towards the kind of package that was more common for senior trade roles in places like London.
Okay, but just to be clear here, did he actually say to you that the current package was not attracting the right calibre of candidate?
That could be my way of framing what he said, but he certainly indicated that that the government was of the view that they may need to improve the package in order to get the right calibre of candidate.
Okay, did he at this meeting on the 17th of February 2021 tell you that he and Treasurer Perrottet had reached an agreement that the cost of suitable family accommodation, including in cleaning in an inner suburb of London, could be taken care of by the New South Wales government outside of the salary package?
Look, this is a long time ago, so I know that I wrote an email to Dr. Broadbent, which I no doubt you will take me to in a moment, but my memory of exactly what was said during that coffee meeting is a little hazy because it was so long ago, and because, to be honest, at that point in time, I didn't know much about the Agent General role, so I can't help you in terms of my memory.
Okay, but did he make reference to a private agreement he had reached with Treasurer Perrottet?
Didn't say a private agreement he'd reached with Treasurer Perrottet. He was talking about the fact that I think he said we have looked at it, and to be fair, it was a role in Treasury, so it may have been my assumption about who he was talking to, but it was clear that it was a position that he felt was supported by other ministers.
Okay. Did he also say to you that suggest that given you have kids in school here and elderly parents who recently moved to Sydney, you should propose how you believed you can make it all work? For example, did he indicate that he understood that you can't move kids until the end of the school year, so you would need to travel back and forth?
We were having a coffee for another reason, and when he raised the possibility of me being interested in the Agent General role, I was just saying, okay, that's interesting, but that means moving to London. And if that means moving to London, what does that mean in terms of the fact that I have kids at school? What does that mean in terms of the fact that our elderly parents have just moved up from Victoria to Sydney? We were just freewheeling about things that may or may not ultimately be decisive in terms of my ability to take the role and move to London. So it was that kind of conversation.
You were freewheeling. Yes. It was a freewheeling conversation. Okay. And look, just to be clear, Mr. Cartwright, because we are going to have to talk about this at some length, there's no reflection on you in respect to your desire to provide education to your kids. That's a desire everyone can understand as well. So just want to be clear about that. But you were freewheeling. Was his parting words, you come back and tell us how it can be made to work for you?
It was something like that. He was basically indicating that at the moment there didn't seem to be a hard and fast view on what the components of the package would be, and so therefore I got the impression that it could be moulded to suit, my circumstances as opposed to perhaps someone else's circumstances where the components might be different. So it felt to me like it was still up in the air as to which components could be put into the package and therefore to make it work for somebody's individual circumstances. That's the impression I got. But
it's fair to say that effectively Mr. Barilaro invited you to apply, certainly gave you the impression that he had the authority to help determine the remuneration package and encouraged you to define precisely what your needs would be in order for you to fulfil this role.
He invited me to come back to let him know if I was interested, which we did the next day. And we were discussing the various matters that would influence whether I could ultimately move to London. And he did indicate that I should let them know, as in, I guess, through the recruitment process, what those challenges were and how they may be dealt with in a package.
Mr. Cartwright, you're not being complete in your account of this conversation, are you?
Yes, as far as I can remember.
And you you did make a record of the conversation that you did email to Dr. Broadbent, which is far more thorough and complete than the account you've given us, haven't you?
I referenced before, Mr. Mookie, that I did send an email about 6 weeks later to Dr. Broadbent.
So let's turn to that. Do you mind turning to page 8 of the tender bundle?
Yes.
If you go down to the bottom of the page, you can see that there's a highlighted section. You can see quite clearly.
Yes.
When the Deputy Premier first asked me to consider the role back in early February, he and I had a very open and frank discussion about my circumstances. I have been on a package over $800,000 for some years and have made financial commitments accordingly, and about his view that the current package on offer was not attracting the right calibre of candidate. Apart from improving the base package, he mentioned low fives. He indicated privately, of course, that he and the Treasurer had reached an agreement that the cost of suitable family accommodation in an inner suburb of London could be taken care of by the New South Wales government outside of the salary package. To be very clear here, Mr. Cartwright, he did tell you that he had a private arrangement with the Treasurer, didn't he?
I think I said to you a moment ago that sitting here now at, in November of 2022, my memory of that coffee meeting now is a lot more faded, but I did indicate to you when you asked me the question the first time that I did send an email, and that's what the email says.
Indeed. And so now, having seen this email again, I'm hoping it may have refreshed your memory. Did Mr. Barilaro discuss with you the conversations he was having with Mr. Perrottet about offering a private arrangement in order to facilitate your entry into the process?
The only help I can give you on that question is what's in the email, Mr. Mookie, because I don't remember that being said because it was so long ago.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. That is actually helpful. But your view is effectively the communication that you sent on the 31st of March was a proper reflection of the conversation that you had with Mr. Barilaro. You weren't misleading Dr. Broadbent or trying to over-egg it or trying to encourage her or verbal the Deputy Premier. You were being genuine when you provided this account of the conversation to Dr. Broadbent on the 31st of March 2021, weren't you?
It would have been my intention to try to reflect the conversation that I had with the Deputy Premier at the time.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. That is helpful. And as I put to you before, his parting words were, you come back and tell us how it can be made to work for you.
Yes, well, that's right. It was about the different components of the package that would reflect different circumstances for different candidates.
And Mr. Cartwright, in that email, that's actually enclosed in quotation marks. That's a direct quotation. You agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Thank you. And to be fair to you, Mr. Cartwright, you do disclose to Dr. Broadbent that you had received an offer from we now understand to be Dr. Lee as the Minister for Skills at the time to be the chairpersonship of TAFE New South Wales. So you were being accurate and you were being honest in this account in the email you were providing, weren't you?
Yes.
Thank you. I just want to ask my colleagues if they have any other questions on this. No? Can we just now turn to your conversations with Mr. Pratt? You say that the first time you had a conversation with Mr. Pratt was around the 21st of February, was it? 19th of February, on paragraph 8 on page 4 of your opening statement. You say that that was the first time you had a conversation with Secretary Pratt.
About the Agent General role, yes.
And did you have any conversations with him about other matters in the month leading up to, or the months leading up to this role? That conversation, sorry?
Yes.
And that did
about
not
other
canvass,
matters.
About other matters, and that did not canvass it.
No.
And you're saying that the first time that Mr. Pratt said to you that that you might be a great candidate was when you had a conversation with him on the 19th of February 2021.
That's correct.
Just quickly, Mr. Cartwright, the day before you met with Mr. Pratt, you met again with the Deputy Premier in his Parliament office?
Yes, that's right.
So, to be clear here, you had a coffee with Mr. Barilaro on the 17th of February. You then saw him on the 18th of February, and then you met with the secretary, Mr. Pratt, on the 19th of February.
And the meeting on the 19th of February was supposed to happen on the 12th of February, but Mr. Pratt had to cancel at the last moment, I suspect because of COVID, and we had to move it a week. So it was originally to be the 12th of February.
By any chance, just on the 18th of February in the meeting with the Deputy Premier, when you said to the Deputy Premier that you would be interested in the role, and you're absolutely adamant, he said that he would let the external recruiter know.
Well, he said he would let the external recruiter know or put me into the recruitment process. It was something like that.
Okay, but he took responsibility for informing others that you have an interest.
Yes, he said, now that I know you're interested, I will put you into the process and I'll have nothing more to do with it.
And I just want to give you another opportunity just to clarify on this point, Mr. Cartwright. You're absolutely adamant that you didn't have any conversations with Mike Pratt prior to the 19th of February about your interest in the role.
Absolutely, because as I said, when I had coffee with the Deputy Premier, his request as to whether I was interested in the role came out of left field. It wasn't something I had even contemplated.
Mr. Cartwright, the problem we have is that your account doesn't accord with the evidence that Dr. Broadbent has given us. Dr. Broadbent told us that Mike Pratt informed her of your interest at a meeting of the Japan selection panel, which took place on the 10th of February, 2021. And she says, and we went through this with Dr. Broadbent at some, it's on page 26 of the transcript, which I think has been provided to you as well. She makes it clear that the first time she hears about your interest is in the aftermath of an interview that takes place on the 10th of February, in which Mr. Pratt grabs her afterwards and effectively says, you need to reopen the process to put Stephen Cartwright in. So I'm struggling to understand how either Dr. Broadbent's wrong or you are, because it's quite clear from the chronology that's been given us that you entered the process earlier in February than the date you're giving us, according to the evidence that Dr. Broadbent has given. Do you wish to respond?
My recollection of the transcript was that Dr. Broadbent was less than certain about when that conversation with Mr. Pratt occurred, but I can't help you in relation to Dr. Broadbent's evidence because I know for certain that the first time that I had any idea about the Agent General role was the 17th of February, and I went home to my wife after that coffee with the Deputy Premier and said, "You're never going to believe this," because my wife had lived in London for 6 years when she was younger in an executive capacity. And I went home to her and said, "You are never going to believe what just happened." So I am crystal clear on the first time that I became aware of the Agent General role and my interest in being involved in it was the 17th of February. And with all due respect to Dr. Broadbent, I suspect she is wrong in her dates.
Can I, just before I hand to the chair, if I can take you to page 3 of the tender bundle?
Sure.
And look, to be fair to you, Mr. Cartwright, this isn't inconsistent with your evidence that you're giving. But you are, if you can see down the bottom there on the page of the email, on the Friday, the 22nd of January, 2021, you are emailing Mr. Pratt's EA in order to establish the meeting, which eventually takes place on the 19th of February. But you see there in the second paragraph, it says, "Secondly, Mike suggested that he and I should grab a coffee soon to discuss my plans for 2021 and beyond." So I presume that's a reference to some form of a phone conversation or a meeting or text message or some form of communication with Mr. Pratt, which was taking place around that period of time?
We had a coffee after I finished with the New South Wales Business Chamber, so I'm guessing October, November, and we were discussing another role that I was interested in at the time. It was a different role, a CEO role, but wasn't in the New South Wales government. And I was just looking for his thoughts on whether he thought that would be a good role for me, whether I'd be a good fit for the role. We agreed when we had that coffee meeting that we'd catch up again early in the new year to when I thought I'd then start to get more serious about looking for what I was going to do next after the Christmas holidays. We'd get together again and I'd pick his brains on any other opportunities that he might or I might know about. So I was just reaching out saying, hey, we agreed to do this and it would be good to catch up.
So just Mr. Cartwright, again, I'm about to hand, but basically there was a pattern of conduct and communication that was taking place with the Secretary of the Treasury over a period of roughly 4 months between September 2020 to February 2021. It prompts you to seek the meeting that Mr. Pratt flagged. Is it possible that actually in the course of one of those communications prior to 10 February, you did actually indicate, or Mr. Pratt did indicate to you an interest in the Agent General's role?
No, it's not possible at all because the 17th of February was the first time that I even thought about the role. And I'm absolutely emphatic about that, Mr. Mookie, because it came out of left field. And therefore it had never entered my consciousness that it was even a remote possibility until it was put to me in that meeting.
And Mr. Cartwright, when you met with Mr. Pratt eventually, 2 days later on the 19th of February, you say in your statement that during that discussion I did ask him about the UK Agent General role. Was Mr. Pratt aware on the 19th of February of your interest that you'd already conveyed to Minister Barilaro, or was he unaware when you raised it?
No, I told him what had happened on the 17th and the 18th of February. So I told him that it had been raised with me by the Deputy Premier, that I'd gone back to the Deputy Premier the following day and said, yes, I am interested, and that he'd said, okay, I will put you into the process. I told Mr. Pratt that on the 19th.
And you're clear about that in your statement. My question is a different one. Was Mr. Pratt aware of that, or was this the first Mr. Pratt was hearing about that on the 19th of February? Of your interest in the role?
It seemed to me that it was the first that he had heard that I was interested was on when I told him.
Thank you.
Can I just follow up with
Yes,
that?
go for it. It's fine.
Sorry, just one.
Yeah, no, it's fine.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. So it might have been the first time that he'd hear it. Did he give you the impression, though, that there had been discussions in relation to your name being considered for that role? Slightly different.
No, he didn't. No, he just, when I asked him, I said, I see that it's a role in Treasury. Could you tell me a bit more about it? He was very forthcoming and he said, look, I think you'd be a good candidate. You should throw your hat in the ring. It was as simple as that.
Sorry, Chair.
No, just keep going on this line of questioning. That's fine.
Thank you. And Mr. Pratt never, or Mr. Barilaro, let's start with Mr. Barilaro. Mr. Barilaro never told you at this point in time that Paul Webster was already the final preferred candidate?
No.
And he never mentioned to you that advertisements and applications had closed?
No.
And he never mentioned to you that his office was seeking to arrange a meeting with Mr. Webster almost contemporaneously to the time that they were talking to you about this?
Well, he couldn't have because he didn't tell me anything about Mr. Webster.
Just giving you the opportunity to be abundantly clear about this, Mr. Cartwright, because it is clear to us that days before, apparently, Mr. Barilaro is offering you an opportunity to apply for the role, his office is accessing information about who is the preferred candidate. It's not you. But no mention is ever made of the fact that the selection panel had already met, had agreed that Mr. Webster, the recommendations were given. No?
No, I didn't know anything about Mr. Webster till much later on.
And just to go down to Mr. Pratt, when Mr. Pratt apparently says to you that you would be a great candidate on the 19th of February, did Mr. Pratt disclose to you that he had already instructed Miss West to make an offer to Mr. Webster, or at least to proceed with Mr. Webster's application?
No.
Did he tell you that, again, Mr. Webster was already... He never said words to the effect of, Stephen, you're a great candidate, but we've already found this person who's been agreed to?
No.
And he never said to you that, gee, the applications have already closed, it's too late, I'm sorry, you would have been great? No.
If he had said that, Mr. Mookie, I would have said, okay, thank you, and moved on with my life.
So, it's. I mean, look, Mr. Cartwright, I expect that you may not be in a position to clarify this, but can you understand the questions that are raised here? To distill it to its core, it looks like to us that the public service arrives at Mr. Webster as the preferred candidate, and then for whatever reason, the Deputy Premier involves himself with apparently some form of a discussion with the Treasurer to unilaterally decide that Mr. Webster's not an appropriate candidate, and therefore they had to search for someone else. And far from searching for someone else, they basically just offer you the job. I mean,
Well, I reject the fact that they offered me a job. They said that I could enter the process, but I'll put to you, Mr. Mookie, that I was a private sector individual who'd been invited to apply for a role. I applied for the role, and anything that was going on in the background was absolutely not known to me, and so I can't help you in your inquiry in that regard.
and look, Mr. Cartwright, to be fair to you, if the Deputy Premier suggests to you that you should apply, it's reasonable for you to assume that the application's are full with them. But I just want to be clear here: the Deputy Premier, neither the Deputy Premier or Mr. Pratt, had disclosed to you that Paul Webster was already chosen at this point in time.
No.
And specifically, Mr. Pratt never disclosed to you that he'd already issued instructions to Ms. Worst to proceed with Mr. Webster's appointment.
If he'd said that, I would have said, well, that means that I can't apply because you've already chosen who's going to have the job. It doesn't make any sense that he would have said that to me and then I went ahead and applied for the role.
Mr. Cartwright, just referring back to your recollection of those discussions with the Deputy Premier, you indicated in writing your recollection on the 31st of March that the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer had reached an agreement that the cost of suitable family accommodation could be taken care of the New South Wales Government outside of the salary package, your recollection at the time. Given you've now told us that the only discussions you had with the Deputy Premier were on those two dates, the 17th of February and the 18th of February, that if your statement is accurate, that agreement, that private discussion must have occurred before the 18th of February, before your final discussion with John Barilaro. Would you agree with that?
That would be a logical conclusion, but can I just clarify one point for you that you've raised in your question? When I say outside the salary package, what I'm referring to there is that Dr. Broadbent had sent me an information pack on the role. And in the information pack on the role, it stipulated a salary package of $450,000 or $430,000, something around that. When I say outside the salary package, I mean these would be components that would supplement or complement. I'm not talking about something that's done on the side. I'm simply saying that along with a base salary, whatever that base salary may happen to be, there would be other components like rent and school fees, for example, which is very typical for offshore trade roles. And this is what Austrade does, this is what the other states do. When I say outside the salary package, I want to make it clear there's nothing sinister implied in that. This is simply saying outside of the base salary, there would be other components. I just want to make that clear because
Understood. Yeah.
I fear that might have been misinterpreted.
Mr. Cartwright, you are aware though that the $450,000 package is what all of the other senior Trade and Investment Commission roles are working within. When you draw the comparison between other Austrade roles, they're actually quite different to the way in which these roles are paid within New South Wales.
Yes.
You're aware of that?
Yes.
So when you received that information from Ms. Broadbent, did you was it your view that must be the total package?
No. When I received the pack, given what had been put to me by the Deputy Premier, I had thought that either it was an old information pack, in other words, it was from a previous time and they were still using it, or the stipulated salary amount was then to be complemented with components that suited each individual candidate's circumstances.
So you
So
don't.
I thought that's fine.
So there wasn't
Sorry.
ever. You don't. No, that's okay. Sorry to interrupt you. So there was never a conversation with either the public servants as you started to negotiate around this position that this was the limit of how much money you would be able to be paid, given that that's the rules under which these salary determinations were made for these roles in New South Wales.
No, because as I said in my statement, on the 14th of April, so this email we're referring to at the moment is the 31st of March.
Mm-hmm.
On the 14th of April, I receive an offer without me asking for anything specific. I receive an offer with a salary package, with a base salary level that was higher than either what was in the information pack and higher than what was mentioned by the Deputy Premier. So the information pack said 450, Deputy Premier said low 500s. I received an offer with a base of 600 and substantial contribution to rent and substantial contribution to school fees. I didn't ask for any of this. This is what was sent to me. So the public servants involved, I don't know who they were or where they were getting their instructions from, but clearly they didn't believe that what was in the information pack was limiting to them, because out of nowhere they sent me that offer.
Which was subsequently withdrawn, though.
Yes, it was. Absolutely. But it's an indicator that at that point in time, these were the components of a package that were being discussed, and it was put to me without my requesting it.
And I've just got one final one, which is, so when you started to embark on this process, did you ever make inquiries about the salary arrangements for the other senior trade and investment commissioner roles in New South Wales, or did you seek to benchmark based on Austrade?
I never made any inquiries about them, because I don't think at that stage anyone had actually been employed.
This was the first.
I was one of the first.
Yes.
And so I wasn't particularly surprised that there was a degree of feeling our way along, if you like, because New South Wales hadn't had an Agent General for 30 years and hadn't had offshore senior trade and investment commissioners. So it wasn't surprising to me that there was a level to which this was sort of being created, if you like, because I was probably the first in line to have these discussions.
Thank you.
I just want to return to those dates, Mr. Cartwright, just to give you the opportunity to put any views on the record. So you
Sure.
had the two meetings with the Deputy Premier. On the 1st, the 17th, you communicated your circumstances in a freewheeling discussion, and you were relatively upfront about what the pressures were on you. And then you met again on the 18th. In one of those two meetings, the Deputy Premier indicated he'd have a private discussion with the Treasurer. They'd reached an agreement about the fact that suitable family accommodation could be accommodated in London. That would have been at the second discussion, looking at that timeline. Can you recall if it was on the 17th or the 18th of February that he indicated that to you?
No, this was the 17th. This is
The
while we were
17th.
having coffee, while I was talking about my children and elderly parents and not being able to move the kids. And it was during that he said, well, you know, we meaning the government, of, you know, we're open to those kind of components. And it was in the vein of that kind of freewheeling conversation that we had that conversation. I noticed, by the way, that in the Deputy Premier's evidence to this inquiry, I looked at the transcript this morning, and I noticed that he did say that it was a general topic of conversation amongst ministers as to securing the right people for these roles and so on and so forth. So whilst I say it certainly, he didn't indicate it was a private conversation with the Treasurer. I got the impression that it was quite out in the open in terms of the conversations.
Mr. Cartwright,
that were going
in
on.
your recollection at the time, and this is not these aren't notes to yourself, these are notes as part of a negotiation about what you will be paid. You represent to NGS Global that this is the view of the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer.
I represent that
it's
what the Deputy Premier said to me. I can't attest to the veracity of whether it happened or not.
But to be fair here, Mr. Cartwright, on page 9 again of the bundle, your recollection is quite clear. As of at least 31 March 2021, you say that the Deputy Premier indicated, and then you say privately, of course, that he and the Treasurer had reached an agreement. Now, I accept your point that there was general discussions happening with ministers, but it's quite clear here that apparently Mr. Barilaro told you that he had a private arrangement with the Treasurer, and in fact, the fact that you indicate privately, of course, strongly suggests that it was the intent of the Deputy Premier not to create a scenario in which his conduct could be scrutinised in respect to this, and neither could the then Treasurer's conduct be scrutinised in this. It's not like you're saying, well, the Deputy Premier told me they had a general discussion. You're saying quite clearly the Deputy Premier told you that he had a private arrangement with the Treasurer to cover the cost of suitable family accommodation in a suburb of London outside the salary package. And just also to be fair, before I give you the opportunity to respond, you say down the bottom in the penultimate paragraph, I don't want to directly disclose my discussions with the DP, etc., or be accused of being unrealistic or playing hardball, but my participation in the process to date has been shaped by these expectations. Now, to be clear here, Deputy Premier Barilaro's indication to you that he could effectively arrange some special treatment for the UK Agent General, if that's what was required, was something that you relied on.
So two issues, Mr. Mookie. First of all, the words that I used in my email, which said he indicated bracket privately, of course, that's a reference to an earlier statement that I made in the email, which says, please, this is a confidential communication between myself and Dr. Broadbent. The privately, of course, means please keep this private between us, Dr. Broadbent. It doesn't mean it was a private conversation between the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer.
Mr. Cartwright,
I guarantee you that's what it means, because I wrote it.
Mr. Cartwright, I mean, look, I accept that you say that now, but you're saying at the time he indicated privately, of course, that he and the Treasurer had reached an agreement.
I'm saying privately, as in between Dr. Broadbent and myself, because earlier in the email I said I'd like to keep this confidential for the time being or for the moment or something. This obviously was a confidential discussion at the very beginning of a recruitment process with a recruiter. And I have to say, Mr. Mookie, having built one of the largest recruitment companies in Australia myself, I'm a little horrified that these private and confidential discussions with senior executives are being broadcast through the media as a result of this inquiry.
These are very unusual circumstances, Mr. Cartwright. That's why that is occurring.
You are one of the New South Wales' highest paid public servants. And so it matters for us as to how precisely your arrangement was struck. And look, to be clear here, like you say actually on the page earlier, which I took you to before, that you had a very open and frank discussion about your circumstances. And you say, I've been on a package of over 800,000 for some years and have made financial commitments accordingly. And about his view of things. Now, look, again, no one begrudges you from obviously pursuing what you consider to be in your interests. But to be clear here, what you're saying to us now is just becoming remarkably inconsistent with what you were communicating to Dr. Broadbent on the 31st of March 2021.
No, I disagree with that, Mr. Mookie. I'm simply trying to help you understand, as the author of the email, what I had intended by using those words.
Fair enough, but to be fair, throughout this entire process, your expectations around salary were in fact set by the initial conversation you had with the Deputy Premier.
Yes, they were, on the basis that if Dr. Broadbent had said to me, Mr. Cartwright, the 450 or the 430,000 is all there is, then I would have politely said thank you and gone on my way.
Mr. Cartwright, so what I'm trying to work out is that you met with the Deputy Premier on the 17th of February. Why was it so urgent for you to come back immediately the next day to discuss everything with him? Did he indicate to you that there was an urgent, that this was urgent? If you were going to accept the role, if you wanted the role, you needed to act quickly. You said you needed to discuss it with your wife. You said it was the first time that you'd heard about the role, yet suddenly you had a meeting with the Deputy Premier in his parliamentary office the next day.
I think the urgency was probably more from my perspective, because I was having other conversations about other opportunities. And if this was a real opportunity, then I wanted to test that as quickly as possible.
And so the Deputy Premier made himself available for you to come into his office and discuss this with him the next day.
That's right.
So, I mean, that just, it
wasn't
does.
it wasn't a long meeting.
So you hadn't heard of the role. He also at that meeting, did you raise with him first the issue of what the salary would be? Can you recall at the meeting on the 17th?
No, as I put in my statement to you at the beginning, he first asked me what I had been on at the New South Wales Business Chamber, and I fear this is where this myth that somehow I was asking, requesting, or demanding $800,000 a year that's been splashed all over the media. It never happened. I never asked for that amount of money. I was asked by both the Deputy Premier and later by Dr. Broadbent what I had been on in my previous roles, and I shared that with them. But I never once said, this is what I need in order to accept the role. In fact, I knew that wouldn't be the case working in the public service. So he asked me what I had been on at the chamber. I told him. He then said, well, this is what we're thinking about. And I said, okay. I said, I need to go and discuss it with my wife. And I committed to get back to him as soon as possible. Now, I wasn't making a commitment to take the job or to take the offer. I was simply committing to come back and say whether I was interested or not, which was fairly easy to do. I went home, I had a conversation with my wife. She said, sounds like it could be a good opportunity. I came back and said, I'm interested. It's not a big commitment to say you're interested in a role.
So to say that to the Deputy Premier, though, you made a time to come in and meet with him in person as opposed to just give him a call and say, I'm interested, what do I do next?
Yeah, I thought he deserved that level of respect.
You don't think that gives you some undue, some favour within a what is supposed to be a selection process based on merit, that the following day you went in again to meet with the Deputy Premier in person? Was that, do you think, to influence in any way you actually getting the role?
No, I was simply paying the Deputy Premier the respect that he deserved.
So just a phone call saying I'm interested, I don't see how that would be disrespectful. Just saying I'm interested, where do I go now in terms of a proper selection process?
I just felt that this was a conversation that should be had face to face. Maybe I'm a little old-fashioned, Chair.
I think I'll leave that. When did you find out that Paul Webster had been identified as the preferred candidate for the role?
I don't think I ever found that out until maybe this inquiry, because my first awareness of Mr. Webster came much later, when it was indicated to me that he had applied for the Agent General role, but may well end up being my Trade and Investment Commissioner for this region, at which point I was very excited about the opportunity because he's a high quality executive.
Mr. Cartwright, you said in your opening statement that your selection as the best candidate was based purely on merit.
Yes.
You would be aware now that, in fact, you didn't rate as highly as the other candidates who went through the same recruitment process that you did. You're aware of that?
I found the evidence on that in this inquiry to be very unclear. I have no doubt that the selection panel rated me as the best candidate for the role. I have no question about that.
Why is that? Why is that? Why do you have no
Because I was
question about that?
Because I was selected. The independent panel obviously chose me as the most suitable candidate.
You don't think that that has anything to do with the fact that the Deputy Premier offered you the role and you went into the Deputy Premier's office the next day and met with him personally and said you're interested in the role? You don't think that that had anything to do with the fact that you were offered the position?
I I don't think it had anything to do with me being offered the position, because the quality of the individuals who sat on that panel would never allow themselves to be influenced that way.
Yet your diagnostic baseline assessment, which all candidates have to be rated against, you didn't score above competent for any of the 16 criteria in that assessment, yet others did, receiving, for example, one candidate rated 9, I think, highly competent. So you don't think that the Deputy Premier, I'll ask it again, the Deputy Premier offering, suggesting that you would, has asked, sorry, how did you put it here, that the Deputy Premier asked you if you might be interested in the UK Agent General role. You considered it, you went back to him and personally met with him the next day. What did he say to you in that meeting? Did he give you an indication then that if you applied, you'd be very much in the running to get that role, or that it would be yours if you applied it? What did he infer in that meeting?
No, I put it in my statement to you what he said, which is, thank you for letting me know that you're interested. I will now put you into the independent process and I will have nothing further to do with it.
So the meeting lasted 30 seconds, did it?
It wasn't very long. Maybe it was 15 minutes at the most.
So, Mr. Cartwright, just once more, it does seem that this is a classic example, really, of a jobs for the boys scenario, don't you think? A jobs for mates scenario. This is a classic example of what people are incredibly frustrated with in this state.
I find that totally unacceptable to characterise my appointment to this role as somehow tainted by that accusation. My qualifications for this role are unable to be challenged, and I have no visibility of how Dr. Broadbent went about her criteria that she looked at candidates, but I'm crystal clear that 3 highly impressive senior independent panel members decided that I was the most suitable person for this role based on merit. And given my background, I don't think there's any way that my appointment can be categorised as jobs for mates, because I don't have any politicians that are mates. I've never been part of any political party. And I got this job because of my background, my experience and my capability. And I totally reject that assertion. In fact, I'm offended by it.
Yet you have, which was mentioned at the beginning of this hearing again by the opposition, but you have led the business chamber, which ran a very high-profile campaign against Labor at the last election, including in particular marginal seats where it was very tight between Labor and the government. You don't think that, plus as the opposition has also stated, you have had direct contact with the Premier in terms of sending text messages in relation to birthdays and what have you, have had a relationship with the Premier.
So can I put this into some context? The business chamber's campaign was something that happened in the lead up to every election. It wasn't a specific campaign in the lead up to the 2019 election. In fact, our most vigorous campaign was in the lead up to the 2011 state election, because the New South Wales economy had just been rated the worst performing economy in the country. And the role of the peak business organisation is to suggest that perhaps we can do better. And we ran pre-election campaigns in every election during my period as CEO and prior to that. There was nothing specific about the 2019 election, no matter how members of this committee want to characterise it, that was an attack on Labor. It was to highlight that there was a particular policy, that being the threshold for small business having to pay payroll tax, where it had been legislated that that was to go to $1 million, and Labor were taking a policy to the election where they were going to reverse that change. And in some of those marginal seats towards the Queensland border, small businesses were moving across the border where they had a much higher payroll tax threshold. And this is not good for business in New South Wales. So what the New South Wales Business Chamber did, because of the way that its members felt about this particular policy, was that it educated the voting communities to say, this is the competing policies of the major parties that are running in the next state election. We will never tell you how to vote. We will never side with one side or the other. We are an apolitical organisation. You make up your own mind on this issue. That was the extent of the pre-election campaign. To suggest that years later, something like a role as important as the Agent General role, which was selected by an independent selection panel, was somehow payback for that, is offensive. And I totally reject it. And it diminishes the importance of this role, and it diminishes the fact that I am highly qualified to do this role. And I find it offensive.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. We'll go back to questions from the opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. We are wanting to move forward to the other events which we have to look into, but do you accept that when you say that you were chosen by an independent selection panel, knowing now what you know, do you accept that that panel was reconvened to consider your candidacy?
Again, I've read all of the transcripts. I've read all of the written statements that have been submitted and the follow-up answers that have been submitted by the three members of that panel. And I can't determine whether that's an accurate statement or not, Mr. Mookie, because those statements that have been submitted seem to suggest that the process was an ongoing process.
Well, that's
so
certainly
I'm
sure.
not able to.
Sure.
I'm not able to help you with that.
But you accept that when the panel met on the 30th of March, the only person that they interviewed that day was you?
I understand that now, but I didn't know that at the time.
And you accept that from the 19th of February, there wasn't any repeated attempt at public advertisement that gave other people the opportunity to make an application late?
I can't help you with any first-hand knowledge of that, but that's what has been said.
And so, following up from what the chair said, you might not be responsible for this, but you seem to be the beneficiary of the direct personal interest of the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer, the then Treasurer, that effectively led to the end of Mr. Webster's candidacy and your substitution.
I can't help you with that because I didn't know anything about Mr. Webster's candidacy. And I don't believe that simply having been referred into the process by the Deputy Premier and never having discussed it with the Treasurer at all, I don't believe that tainted or supported my application. I believe that I was appointed based on merit.
Sure. And look, Mr. Cartwright, again, you might not be in a position to assist us with this, but the evidence that's in front of us is that you are the only person of the many applicants to this role who was allowed to apply late, that had 2 meetings with the Deputy Premier, then had a meeting with the Treasury Secretary, all before your candidacy was considered by a selection panel. Do you understand how that creates the perception of that you got special treatment and no one else had a level playing field to compete fairly for this job?
I struggle to understand that because I said to you earlier that I built one of the largest recruitment firms in Australia. And one thing I know when you are recruiting senior executives, and I've employed a lot of senior executives over the years myself, and one thing I know is that one of the best sources of potential quality candidates for any vacancy is the client themselves. The client operates in the industry that they're in. The client sees a lot of people in their networks. It's always something that a good recruiter will do is say, do you know anybody in your network that might fit this particular job vacancy? And it's very common for people to come free from another role, present themselves in the process, and it's very, very common in executive recruitment for candidates to come in later than other candidates, particularly when, as Dr. Broadbent said, there was no closing date on the applications.
Mr. Cartwright, moving on, after you were effectively indicated that you become the preferred candidate around the 31st of March, did you have any conversations with Mr. Pratt afterwards as you were negotiating the terms of your engagement?
Not to the best of my recollection, no.
No, okay. Can I just very quickly, just to be clear, you don't have any recollection of having any contact with Mr. Pratt around late April 2022?
No, I don't.
Okay, can I just take you to page 18 of the tender bundle?
Yes.
You can just see here that Mr. Pratt is emailing Miss West asking for an update as to where we are at with Stephen Cartwright.
Yes.
And you can see that Miss West's response above is, we got legal advice and we'll have to get an exemption for London given the package. You see that?
Yes.
Okay, and there's nothing you can recall that would have prompted Mr. Pratt to send that email?
No. No.
Okay, and can you just go forward to page 17?
Yes.
But you can see here on April 12, you're seeking an update, which, to be fair to you, you disclosed, I think, earlier that you were, because you were being offered other jobs at the time. You didn't make any attempt to see or contact Mr. Pratt between you sending this email to Miss West and Mr. Pratt's response 10 days later?
No, not that I can recall.
Fair enough. Can I just also, in respect to Mr. Pratt, just before we might need to take a break a bit earlier then, before we start the next line of questioning, but there's one more question that I just asks as well, just in respect to, let me just find the appropriate page reference if you don't mind, but if you were to turn to page... actually, we might return to that afterwards.
Okay. All right. It's 9:27 here. So what we'll do, Mr. Cartwright will go to our scheduled break, which was due to be in 3 minutes now, but we'll come back again at 9:40. So 9:40 our time, whatever that is your time. We'll see you in about 13 minutes.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, Mr. Cartwright, do we have you back?
You do.
Okay, wonderful. All right, we'll proceed to questions from the opposition. Again, Mr. Daniel Mookie to kick things off.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you again, Mr. Cartwright, for joining us. We'll just move forward now to effectively what I'm going to describe as the events surrounding the negotiation of the contract that you eventually enter into, if that's okay, Mr. Cartwright.
Yes.
First things first, if I can just take you to page 7 of the tender bundle, if you don't mind. Where we left off before the break was at least an acknowledgement that the conversation you had with the Deputy Premier on the 17th and 18th of February did set your expectations around the remuneration and other conditions that would allow you to enter into an engagement with the New South Wales government. And just I just want to show you one thing so you can at least, because as we developed a line of questioning, you can see on page, just working through this email chain, which we have discussed, your email to Dr. Broadbent we've covered from page 8 to 9 of the tender bundle.
Yes.
And that accords with your statement in terms of the events that you outlined as well. But you can see here, just working up the page on page 8, you can see that Dr. Broadbent forwards your email to Miss West, and you can see that Dr. Broadbent says, "Jenny, see below from Stephen confirming my comments yesterday." You can, I presume you can see that.
This is on page 8, yes.
Yes. And so just working up to page 7, you can then see that what Miss West does is forward it to Michael Pratt and Tim Reardon, who is the Secretary of Treasury and the Secretary of the DPC. You can see that?
Yes.
And then you can see Mr. Pratt's response. Mr. Pratt says, "Thanks, Jenny. Please sit down with Stephen and get clarity on his requirements and then draft a package together for us to review. As discussed last night, I do not believe his expectations that I'm aware of are unreasonable in these circumstances." You see that?
Yes.
And then above, Miss West replies by going, "Mike, understood. I'm catching up with Stephen tomorrow morning and we'll come back." You see that?
Yes.
Did you catch up
Yes.
with Miss West the next morning?
1st of April, yes. I remember we did because we had to get it in before Easter.
And did you have any further discussions around your expectation around remuneration?
We probably did. I don't remember the content of that discussion at all. I know we had a Teams call, but I don't remember what we talked about. But I can only imagine we did.
Okay. The only reason I ask is because, look, the day before you're seeking advice from Dr. Broadbent as to how to canvass your discussions with the Deputy Premier without directly disclosing them. Did you resolve how you would conduct yourself in that conversation with Miss West?
No, because Dr. Broadbent didn't give me any advice in that regard.
Sure.
So I would have still been relatively careful in my conversation with Miss West.
Okay, you would have been... what do you mean by careful?
Well, in the sense that, as I said in the email to Dr. Broadbent, I was trying not to come across as hard to get on with, as playing hardball in the negotiations. I was open to hearing what the government was proposing in terms of how a package could be put together. So I was probably doing more listening than talking, in the sense of, asking questions of Miss West, how does this work in the government? How do these things fit together?
Sure.
Being as conciliatory as I possibly could, because I was trying, as I said in the email, to not come across as difficult or hard to get on with.
Fair enough. And just before I move on from that particular meeting with Miss West, did you disclose to Miss West that you were in discussions with the Deputy Premier, or you had discussions with the Deputy Premier around remuneration conditions?
I can't. I said to you earlier, I can't remember what we talked about, but I don't think I did at that stage, and that to me is reinforced by the fact that Dr. Broadbent in her evidence said that ultimately she had to send that email of mine to them in order for them to become aware of it. I don't recall that I disclosed it to Miss West.
Okay, fair enough. Let's just move forward in time now. We can go through this relatively quickly, Mr. Cartwright, if you don't mind, until we get to some of the more interesting matters. But you say that in your opening statement on page 5 and paragraph 15 that on 14 April 2021 you contacted Miss West to seek an update on progress, and some hours later you were sent an email from Dr. Broadbent which read as follows, and then you've described the email.
Yes.
Is it possible that actually you got that email a bit earlier than that?
No, that email definitely came on the 14th.
Okay, can I take you to page 13 of the
Yes.
tender bundle? Not much turns on this, Mr. Cartwright, but
Sorry, go ahead.
okay, so you can see down the bottom, actually Dr.
Yes.
Broadbent is sending you an email on the 12th of April 2021.
Monday, 12th
Yes.
of April at
2 days
1:13
prior.
p.m.
And you can see Dr. Broadbent to you, CC to Miss West. That's the first
Yes.
discrepancy between what you say in your opening statement and what the documents show. The second discrepancy is that you say that apparently Dr. Broadbent informed you that a significant contribution to accommodation, understanding that a well-located 3-bedroom residence is required. I can't see reference to that in this email. What I do say is, actually I do. That's my mistake, Mr. Cartwright. It's in the second dot point as well. So it's fair to say that, not much turns on it, other than the fact that you got it a bit earlier than we thought, right?
That's confusing because I'm certain that I double checked all of these dates with my records, and I had it as the 14th. But as you say, I'm not sure that anything changes between the 12th.
Other than the fact that if you go up the page, apparently not only did you get an email, you spoke with Dr. Broadbent as well, and she read this out to you, according to Dr. Broadbent and Miss West, and you apparently sound very happy with the progress. So the issue is that there was actually, what else was discussed in that conversation?
Well, I don't remember, but I will say to you that if she read out the email that you're referring to at 1:13 p.m. on the 12th of April, why would I not be happy with that?
Well, to be fair, that's a fair point. But then if we go forward to page 15, not only do you have a conversation with Miss Broadbent, but actually you reply on the 12th of April, not on the 14th of April,
Right.
and you say the only condition that you seem to indicate or in response is that you expect travel to and from London is in a business class seat, and subject to understanding what significant contribution means, I'm comfortable with the package as you have outlined it.
Yeah.
Now,
That's right.
is that what you mean in paragraph 16 when you say I replied to Dr. Broadbent by email the same day and I said that subject to a few clarifications I was happy with the offer?
Yes, that's what I mean.
And what did you understood a significant contribution to mean?
I had no idea. Significant contribution to me means more than 50%.
50% of what?
Sorry?
50% of what?
Well, whatever the rent is and whatever the school fees are. And the rent would be for a 3-bedroom home in an inner suburb of London, and the school fees would be whatever it was that was an appropriate school for the kids. But that's why I wrote back and said, I really need to understand what significant contribution means. Is it half? Is it 3/4? I didn't really know, but subject to that, I felt the offer was where we needed to go.
Okay, fair enough. But to be clear here, part of the reasons perhaps that may shed light on some of your conduct later in these series of events is that you're told that there's be a salary plus a super package of $600,000, significant contribution to accommodation, understanding that a well-located 3-bedroom residence is required, appropriate temporary accommodation till longer-term arrangements are located, significant contribution to school fees, reasonable relocation expenses, reasonable travel between the UK and US is required. That was your initial expectations, correct?
UK and Sydney as required, yes.
Yeah. And again,
Sorry, could I stop you there?
Please.
Sorry, could I stop you there?
yeah.
They weren't my expectations. This was the offer that was put to me.
Okay. But you reflect the fact that according to this email, and look, Dr. Broadbent apparently had discussions with Investment New South Wales and New South Wales Treasury officials. We understand the following arrangements will be put in place. Do you understand how perhaps your initial conversations with Deputy Premier then informed the conduct of the New South Wales Treasury and Investment New South Wales to provide such an offer to you?
I suspect that my communication with Dr. Broadbent about what was said to me in the initial stages, which then allowed Dr. Broadbent to understand my personal circumstances, that is needing a home for a family, needing to put my kids into schools in London. I suspect that did shape the response in terms of the offer, because I was very pleased that the government had tried to accommodate those needs in what was being offered to me.
And do you accept either then or now that the package that was then offered to you that did reflect, as you just put it, your disclosure of your requirements to Dr. Broadbent was well and truly above what was being considered for any of the other stick arrangements, which would also have similar requirements for people to relocate, alter family arrangements, find a suitable accommodation? Do you accept the fact that no other stick commissioner was being offered anything like this? Or has been offered anything like this?
Well, I haven't been offered anything like this.
What do you mean by that, Mr. Cartwright? This is the offer that was originally made to you.
You there, Mr. Cartwright? Your video's just gone off. Can I check whether you can still hear us? We may have just lost connection with you. Oh no, you're back. Can you hear us okay?
Back again?
Okay.
Yes, I can. The answer to my question, Mr. Mookie, was I can only assess those things knowing what I know today, but I wasn't eventually offered anything like this either.
Eventually.
I do want to press you on that distinction you're drawing between what you were offered and your expectations. Your expectations were in line with this initial offer, not unreasonably, I would say, Mr. Cartwright, because of the discussions you'd had with the Deputy Premier. You clearly outlined that in your email, that those expectations about accommodation, about an inner Sydney, an inner suburb of London were shaped by that discussion, weren't they? That's a fair recollection of your record of that discussion.
Yes, I will say this. I put it in my statement that I had assumed that the job description that was sent to me with a base of 450, 430 or 450, I can't remember which was in there, but round about that, I had expected that would then be the base, and then it would be supplemented with the rent and the school fees. The Deputy Premier mentioned a base of low fives, just above 500,000. So I had accepted when I got the information pack, which was well after that, that perhaps the 450 was close enough to what he had been referring to. But I will say to you that I was quite surprised to receive this email, which had a base of 600. And you know, it's not for a candidate to say, "Gosh, you're being really generous here. Please don't send me that." If that's what's being offered, then terrific. But I don't want it to be painted that I was somehow slamming my fist on the table saying, "You must give me this package," because that's simply not true.
Well, Mr. Cartwright, I'm simply making the point that your expectations were set, as you've retailed it on the 17th of February in that discussion with the Deputy Premier, and that agreement between the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer that he relayed to you. Do you agree with that?
What I would say is that was what was represented to me, that this offer on the 12th of April exceeds that representation.
Mr. Cartwright, can I take you to page 11 and 12 of the tender bundle, if you don't mind?
11 and 12?
Yeah.
Yes.
So we've established that you actually made the offer on the 12th of April. Firstly, you can see on page 11, it outlines the STIC proposed arrangements as of 12 April 2021 for the non-agent general position. Have you seen this before?
No.
Okay, so I presume you were not sent this at the time?
It's not familiar to me, and I don't, for example, you can see toward the end of this document, and I can't identify where this document came from, but toward the end of this document, there's a reference to Deloitte. I can't recall ever seeing that in anything that was sent to me, because I remember when Deloitte ultimately got involved in talking to me about the UK employment arrangements, that was the first time I'd ever heard that Deloitte were to be involved. So I can't imagine that I did see this.
Okay, fair enough. But if you turn to page 12, you can see the special arrangement that was being configured by government for you. And you can see there are some discrepancies between what you were to be offered and what every other STIC offer was being made, well, was being designed at the time. You can see that only you were getting a well-located 3-bedroom residence as required, and only you were getting a significant contribution to school fees, and you were getting a salary and super package about $150,000 more than every other STIC commissioner. So, again, I presume you did not see the document on page 12?
No.
So, and look, you might not be in a position to respond to this, but it seems clear to us that at the same time you're being made this offer on the same day, it's at least known to the government that your arrangements were to be special and separate from other STIC arrangements, and that was being actively contemplated by the government.
The only thing I will say to you, if it helps the committee, is that is consistent with the way that Austrade arranged their affairs as well for senior trade staff in places like London, where the circumstances of the candidate, that being a person who has children, is given a higher rental capability than somebody who doesn't have children. Similarly with school fees. So it's quite common that that Austrade do vary their offer for their packages based on the circumstances of the individual candidate. And I do know that Miss West came from Austrade to the New South Wales government. So this I'm just speculating, but this may be why there is some discrepancy in that regard.
Okay, fair enough. Let's just move forward in time. You make the point that at page 7 of your statement in paragraph 22 that you received the drafts of your employment contract and a relocation letter for your review. That's a couple of months later, correct?
Yes.
Okay, fair enough. And what concerns did you have about the draft when you first saw it? Do you recall?
Yeah, as I said in my statement, my concern was that the contract appeared to be what I would call boilerplate public service contract for people who were working in New South Wales. And therefore, some of the provisions I felt were not realistic. And I'll give you one example, Mr. Mookie, for example, and I've raised this in the emails that you've seen, but it was proposed that if I wanted to terminate the employment, I would give 90 days notice to the government. If the government wanted to terminate my employment, they were proposing to give me 30 days notice. And I wrote back and said, look, I'm moving my family to the other side of the world. I'm having to take a lease on a property which would be difficult for me to then get out of quickly. normal private sector practice is that at least whatever the executive is required to give in terms of notice, so does the employer have to give a similar level of notice. And I said I just didn't think it was reasonable that I was going to be allowed to be given 30 days notice and in return the government expected me to give 90 days notice, and ultimately that was conceded. But that's just one example of some of the things that I had to raise. And I have to say this, Mr. Mookie, I've hired hundreds of executives, and it's not unusual for the executive to come back and say, well, what about this and what about something else in terms of arranging the contract to be acceptable to them. It's absolutely standard.
Oh, look, Mr. Cartwright, no one disputes your ability to quibble and adjust contracts of employment, sure. But you made reference to one of the issues that you felt was perhaps boilerplate or inconsistent, which was the termination clause. Were there any other issues that you had with the draft contract that you could recall?
Oh, there was a provision that said that if I was put on gardening leave, that I would get my salary, and that's where I raised the issue about the fact that it should also include the allowance because of the artificial way that the 600,000 had been broken up. I wanted to make sure the contract reflected the fact that really, in reality, the allowance and the base were really the same thing. They were just being categorised differently. I also wanted, for example, to raise the issue in terms of relocation. I couldn't get my head around the fact that I could take a container, I could fill it full of furniture, I could put it on a ship to London to furnish a home, and the government was comfortable with me claiming that as part of my relocation allowance. But I couldn't drive my car into a container, close the door and put that container next to my container of furniture so that I had a car to drive around London. And according to the government, that wasn't something that was appropriate to be covered by the taxpayer. Okay. And I just, for the life of me, couldn't understand the difference between those two things. And so I raised that. Ultimately, though, it was rejected.
Well, let's work through this, Mr. Cartwright. Can I also just say, you did make the point, I think earlier, did I hear you correctly when you said that as this you weren't having conversations with ministers about the contract?
That's right.
Did you have any conversations with any minister in the 5 months from your contact with Mr. Barilaro and the time that you signed this contract?
The only minister I had any discussion with at all was Minister Lee, to let him know that I wouldn't be able to continue our discussions around TAFE.
Okay, so you didn't have any other discussions with the Deputy Premier after the 17th of February?
I did not.
You're absolutely adamant about that?
I cannot recall ever having had a conversation with the Deputy Premier through that period.
And that 5-month period that you refer to is from the 18th of February when you had that discussion with the Deputy Premier through to the 26th of July 2021 when you commenced your employment.
That's right.
And you didn't have any discussions with the Deputy Premier, about when you'd go to the UK or anything like that?
No, those discussions we had, I think, the day that I was being appointed, which was the 1st of October, but I'd been employed for some months by then.
Okay. Do you mind turning to page 28 of the tender bundle? This is a long email chain, so we're going to have to pick it up from various points of it, but you can see that effectively it accords with what you said, which is you're sent across a draft contract of employment for which you then provide feedback. In your opening statement on page 7, on page 23, you say, on 11 July, I sent an email to Ms. West and set out all my questions and concerns with the draft. You can see that on page 28, there is that email reproduced, correct?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. Again, are you sure that you didn't have any conversations with anyone with the Deputy Premier in the 5 months after you had your contact with February 18 to the date that my colleague just mentioned?
I do not recall ever having had a conversation with any politician through that period, other than Dr. Lee.
Okay, can you turn to page 29? Go straight down to the bottom to this last highlighted paragraph, which commences with paragraph F. You see that?
Yes. Yes.
This is what you say in response to Schedule A, Clause 3.2.2. You say, in all of my discussions with the Deputy Premier and other senior government executives over the past 5 months or so, it was accepted that I would travel over to the UK later this year, set up the office and get everything settled. And then I would need to come back to Australia to pick up the family and move them over when it was right to change schools. I'm assuming this will be a work trip back and the quarantine costs, if still, will be covered. So, I mean, the issue that I've got, Mr. Cartwright, is that you're clearly making some reference to discussions you've been having with the Deputy Premier from that 18th of February to the 26th of July. And in fact, you're invoking the name of the Deputy Premier in the very first response you make to the contract that you've been offered, which doesn't accord with what you just said to us.
What I'm referring to there is the initial discussion that I had with the Deputy Premier and other discussions that I had with other senior government executives over the last 5 months or so.
Well, the reason why, Mr. Cartwright, I struggle to accept that is because you're telling us that in your conversation with 18 February, that with Deputy Premier Barilaro, that after you confirm your interest, he apparently tells you that you're going through some form of an independent process. But now you're saying effectively not only that, he must have also told you that he would expect that you would win it and you would get over to the UK later this year. I mean, it can't be, both of these statements can't be true, that apparently Mr. Barilaro was telling you that you are to be subjected to an independent process after you confirm your interest to him directly, but somehow at the same time he's having conversations with you about when you're going to London.
No, I completely reject your assertion. It's not right.
So you did have a
I will
discussion?
explain to you.
You did have a discussion on the 18th of February with Mr. Barilaro about when precisely you'd be relocating to London?
No, of course not.
So then what are you referring to in Schedule F when you say, in all of my discussions with the Deputy Premiers over the past 5 months, it was accepted that I would travel over to the UK? Like, when did you have that conversation with the Deputy Premier?
I'm happy to answer the question, Mr. Mookie, unless you have another one.
Go ahead, Mr. Cartwright.
Thank you. The term "in all of my discussions with" names more than one person. It names the Deputy Premier to begin with and other senior government executives as well. So all of my discussions relate to all of those people.
Who would you have?
All of my discussions with
Which senior government executives are you referring to?
Well, for example, the conversation that I had with Mr. Pratt.
So you did have a conversation with Mr. Pratt on the 19th, sorry, did you say, Mr. Cartwright? I didn't mean to cut you off.
19th of February, which I've already disclosed in my statement.
So you're having a conversation with Mr. Pratt on the 19th of February about when you'd be relocating to London, despite you not actually being chosen for the job at the time.
Well, as I said in my statement, I said to Mr. Pratt during that conversation that if I ultimately was successful in getting this job, there were things like my kids and my elderly parents that I would have to factor in to the timing of when I would be able to go over to the UK. And there was a similar conversation to the one I had on the 17th of February with the Deputy Premier, which is, I got to go and talk to my wife because we've got kids at school and the kids don't finish until December. So if I was successful in getting the job, it was about trying to, back at that stage, say to the government, if you want somebody who can drop everything and go now, then I've got some challenges with that. I was doing it as a matter of transparency. That's what I'm referring to in this clause.
Okay. Was the Deputy Premier and Mr. Pratt the only senior government executive you were referring to? Was there any other senior government executive you were referring to there?
I think from memory we may have discussed this in the panel interview, but I can't be certain. But there's something in my memory that says that it may have been toward the end of the panel interview where I talked about some of those challenges.
Okay.
I can't be sure about that, but there's something in my head that says we may have discussed it briefly.
No problems, Mr. Cartwright. You make the point that you were concerned about the termination clause, and I think the reason you gave was because there was an inconsistency between when you're meant to give termination notice and when the government can give you termination notice. Was it actually the case that you were worried about an incoming government terminating you?
Yes, absolutely, because when you are when you are negotiating an employment contract, Mr. Mookie, what you do is you imagine a worst case scenario. You're a lawyer by training. You understand that this would be advice that you always give to your clients. You imagine a worst case scenario and you try to draft a contract that provides you with adequate protection in the event that that worst case scenario comes to pass.
So,
So I wanted to make certain that the contract gave me adequate protection in the event that there was a change of government, and that government didn't like the colour of my tie or didn't like me and decided that they would rather put someone else in the role. And you know, Mr. Mookie, that this happens in these kind of senior roles when there's a change of government. So I wanted to simply make sure that I had adequate protection. As I understand, people in the senior executive ranks of the government in New South Wales do have adequate protection.
so I'll take you to your feedback in paragraph 4 on page 29. So when this is what you said, there is also the very real political dimension for my job. The next state election is in March 2023, which will be 20 months into my 36-month tenure. If the people of New South Wales saw fit to make a change at the time and the incoming administration decided to terminate me or my role for no reason associated with my performance, but rather than I was seen as aligned with the current government or because they wanted someone else in the role, to be left with 30-day notice and no entitlement to redundancy would be unreasonable. And you recall having a discussion with Kate Carnell, who was, when she had a 5-year term as the Commonwealth Small Business Ombudsman, and it looked as though the shortened government would happen halfway through her term, remembering she was a former Liberal Chief Minister, and she told me that her employment contract required the rest of her term to be paid out if it was terminated for no good cause, i.e. political reasons. So that basically was an expression of what you just told us.
Yes, that I wanted to make certain that if I was terminated for no cause, that I had adequate protection. I don't think that's unreasonable.
Fair enough. And the actual form of protection that you were seeking, or you seem to be implying, is that you would like to be paid out for the remainder of your term.
Look, that also is not unusual, but what I was really seeking was at least adequate notice and adequate redundancy.
Sure. Okay, well, we might pick that one up shortly. But the other issue that you flagged was concerns that you weren't in a position to transport your cars over in a container.
Yeah.
Correct. And that's on page 30
Correct.
of this. You can see. You
Yeah.
say that?
I think cars is a typo. It was only ever one, but anyway.
Okay, so you wanted
Well, it does say taking one of our cars.
one of our cars, to be fair.
Oh, yes, that was one of our. Yes.
So you did want to take one of your cars,
Yes.
and this was important to you.
Well, I knew we couldn't afford to buy another car, so I thought that given that the relocation amount was the relocation amount, it was no difference to the government whether I was shipping furniture or shipping a car. They both go in a container. Both the costs would be deducted from the relocation amount, and it would make my life a lot easier with a family to have a vehicle over in London. For the life of me, I couldn't understand why that wasn't something that could be covered by the relocation allowance, and in the private sector, it wouldn't be a second thought. And so I was just a bit shocked.
Right. And I mean, so did you have, clearly you didn't have awareness that perhaps in the public sector that might be not a preferred practice. And to be fair, in parts of the private sector, that would also be resisted as well. But the cars issue was important to you, clearly, because you did persist with it as an issue, didn't you?
Car issue, singular.
The car issue, the issue to do with the transportation of your car to London.
Mr. Mookie, I said in my statement I'd never worked for government before, so I'm coming in to these conversations with only private sector experience, I just couldn't understand the logic. I often struggle if somebody can't present a logical reason for a particular policy.
Can I ask you, was the car special? Was there a special car, or was it just a matter of you couldn't? It was just a matter that you didn't want to necessarily incur the cost of acquiring a new vehicle in London.
Yes, it was just going to make life easier. The Victorian Agent General has a car provided, as does the South Australian Agent General. But given that I was going to not have a vehicle, I thought the simplest thing for me to do was to at least have mine taken over there so I could use it.
And which of the cars would you have taken over?
Well, the family car.
Which is
Just trying to understand. Yeah.
what sort
It's
of
a
car?
family car. Well, it's a family car. It's a
I'm
four-wheel
the
drive.
Shadow Roads Minister, Mr. Cartwright. I've taken interest in
Check
these
the reg,
matters.
Well, we're trying to understand the magnitude of the replacement cost, Mr. Cartwright, because to be fair, in order to understand perhaps why this particular issue around the car persists for a while, it does turn a bit on sort of what were your expected replacement costs of the vehicle should you have to replace it in the event that you weren't allowed to take it over.
Well, what it would mean is I would have to sell the car in Australia, buy a new one in the UK with all the changeover costs and arrangements associated with that. And then at the end of the the end of the 2 and a bit year term, because of COVID, I end up coming to the UK with 2.5 years left. You can't take a 2.5 year lease on a vehicle. So then you have this problem of not having an employment contract that supports a 4-year lease or a 3-year lease, because I was only going to be there for a shorter period of time. And I thought the sensible solution to all of this problem is to use some of the relocation budget to send my car over. To this day, I don't understand why it's such a big issue.
Okay, can I take you to page 50 of the tender bundle?
Just before we do that, can I just confirm that the position you're putting in this email, that is, you would be 20 months into a 36-month tenure, if, as you suggest, your contract was paid out at the $600,000 payment, that would be approximately $780,000, the remainder of the contract. Does that accord with your understanding?
No, I wasn't expecting that there would be an agreement to pay out the contract. What I was hoping for was a provision in relation to reasonable notice, which ultimately was agreed to, the 90 days. Because at this stage it was still 30 days. And so I was saying, look, if I'm on the other side of the world, I've got to sort out a lease and I've got to come home and I've got to relocate everything. I think 30 days is pretty skinny in those circumstances, and I think most people would agree with that. And I was looking for some sort of redundancy because it was unclear to me whether the redundancy arrangements that apply to all other senior executives who work for the state government would apply to me or not.
Well, Mr. Cartwright, in your document, you say this: I would ask for a mutual 90-day notice period and for the payout of the remaining term of the contract if my employment is terminated without cause as a result of or subsequent to a change of government. I'm just making the observation and checking you agree with it, that amount would be $780,000 or thereabouts.
Yes, but it was a negotiation about having some movement, and obviously you start with your best position.
Okay, look, we're just got to close out these 3 issues that are raised. If you go to page 50 of the tender bundle, if you don't mind.
Yes.
If you go down to point 11 of your email reply.
Yes.
This is a correspondence you're sending on July 15, so this is now a couple of weeks after the first conversations that were had around the negotiation, or after you've received the draft offer. In fact, it may even be 6 weeks, actually. No, actually, to be fair, it's 2 weeks. You can see here, to be fair to you, Mr. Cartwright, the point you just made to us, you make to the public service. You say, as for relocating a car, I'm a little confused as to why this is any different to household furniture. Both go in shipping containers and both are being transported to avoid having to buy expensive replacements for a short-term contract. Perhaps we can discuss this afternoon. Did you have a discussion this afternoon about the cars?
I did, and I was basically told it's not happening, drop it.
Okay, and who was that with?
That would have been with Mr. Carr.
That is General Counsel Carr of Investment New South Wales.
That's right.
Okay, fair enough. Can I then take you...
Mr. Cartwright, are you seriously put in the position that you couldn't afford to buy a car? If I think I heard you right when you were giving evidence earlier, given the salary you had been on, given the salary you would be on?
It's more complicated than that. It's about the fact that you can't take out a 2.5 year lease on a vehicle whilst at the same time supporting a lease on the vehicle that I had in Sydney. So I would have to extricate myself from the car I was leasing in Sydney, pay out the balloon, take out a new lease. And the first thing the leasing company would say to you is, let's see your employment contract, because you're an Australian, you've moved to the UK, and the employment contract says it finishes in 20 months. So it's doable, but it's not sensible in any way.
Yeah,
shape,
and
or
I
form.
appreciate those complications, but I heard your evidence as you didn't think you could afford a car. Can I invite you to reconsider that evidence?
What I'm saying is, it didn't make any. It would have been a financially bad outcome if I'd tried to do that.
So what happened? Did you get a car in the
I'm
UK?
living here. I'm living here without a car.
Okay. And you're still maintaining the lease arrangements here, which is what's caused a bit of distress, clearly, Mr. Cartwright, for you.
Yes.
Okay. Can we just move now to the government's response to these requests, if you don't mind?
Sure.
If you go to page 52, I mean, again, this is a somewhat, it's a reply to a reply to a reply. So I might just need to take you to the key sections. You can see that there's a deviation in the size of the text, to be clear. But if you're on page 52, in Roman numeral 4, you can see that in smaller text, it says there's a paragraph that begins with "we believe." Do you see that?
Yes. Yes.
So this is in response to your claim for better redundancy should there be a change in government. And you can
Yes.
go down and see that the response that comes from Miss West to you is, we, however, are not building into our arrangements or appointments political carve-outs for hypothetical changes in government. This approach is being taken consistently for all senior positions abroad, and we won't be deviating from that as it would be inappropriate to do so. You see that?
I do.
So, Mr. Cartwright, do you understand that you were effectively asking public servants to give you something that they're in no position to give?
I didn't understand that at the time. I've never worked for government before. So I was asking questions about, can the contract be changed for this? Can the contract be changed for those things?
Sure.
Well, in the end, it's up to the representative of the government to tell me what they can and can't do. It's not for me to know those things.
Of course, we'll get to that. Mr. Cartwright, can we turn, please? We won't go over the entertainment issues, but we'll go straight to the issues to do with the cars, which is on page 55.
Yes.
You can see that Miss West says to you, we cannot allow this to be included in the relocation amount as it's not considered an appropriate use of taxpayer money. Do you see that?
Yes, I can.
And
Yes.
that's a position that you eventually accept with some disappointment. Is that a
Yeah.
fair characterisation?
That's right. Yes.
Look, Mr. Cartwright, the reason I'm asking you this is that, putting aside the legitimacy of this claim or otherwise, Miss Brown has told us that as you went about seeking this, it meant that the negotiations for you were much more fraught than the negotiations with everybody else. And none of the other stick commissioners were seeking these conditions. And equally, Miss Brown says that this starts to indicate, at this point in time, there is some suggestion that that's when you start invoking the name of the Deputy Premier and other senior political figures of the government. Now, I accept that you reject Miss Brown's evidence on that respect, but do you understand how persistently demanding matters that public servants cannot give you over the period of, weeks, isn't necessarily conduct that is becoming of a person who becomes Agent General?
No, I completely reject what you're saying. First of all, I don't know this for certain, but I'm fairly sure that the other senior trade and investment commissioners don't have school children to move. Secondly, I don't see anything unusual with this set of discussions around an employment contract with a very senior executive. I see nothing unusual about this at all. And when Ms. Brown suggested that, it was a difficult negotiation, all that led me to believe is that she obviously hasn't done too many of them. I've done hundreds of them.
You think
And this is not unusual at all.
So you think the issue here was Miss Brown didn't have the skill or experience in order to navigate claims of this type?
I'm saying that her perception that this was a difficult negotiation suggested to me that she hasn't done too many executive negotiations, because this was not a difficult negotiation at all. This was a frank exchange of some questions that I had about the contract, some seeking to understand why particular positions were being adopted, trying to have a conversation about the logic behind some of the things I was asking for. And in the end, I had to just, what amused me, Mr. Mookie, was some suggestion that I was the one playing hardball in the negotiations. That couldn't be further from the truth. I was basically being told, no, 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 no. The hardball was coming from the other side, not from me.
Do you accept that Miss Brown didn't have legal authority to give you what you were asking for?
I do now, but I'm a private sector citizen applying for a job, and I think it's reasonable that I say, what about this? What about these things? Can you explain to me why this is logical and that's not logical? I don't think there's anything unusual about this at all.
Mr. Cartwright, do you accept that had you prevailed in this negotiation, the outcome for the public would be that we'd be paying you as Agent General a package which is close to twice what we pay the Police Commissioner?
I'm not sure which package you're talking about now, because I had 3 packages offered to me.
Well, I'm asking you, Mr. Cartwright, to be frank, the first 2 packages, had they been acceded to, would have resulted in you becoming the highest paid public servant in New South Wales, by far. Do you accept that?
The second package that was offered to me, the one that was outlined by Deloitte, provided a salary less than the CEO of Investment New South Wales.
Not with all the accruements. Do you accept that?
Which were they?
Cost of living allowance, rent support,
No.
school fees,
No.
car transport.
None of that was in the second offer. It was all gone, all swept away.
Okay, Mr. Cartwright, we'll move on. We find ourselves in a scenario where you enter into a contract on the 26th of July, and then
Yes.
thereabouts between then and October, for the circumstances in which you describe in your opening statement, for which I don't plan to spend much time on, but you find out that effectively this result, the way in which you're being remunerated, isn't consistent with your expectations, namely because you hadn't yet relocated to the UK, but you expected the cost of living allowance for the UK to be paid to you automatically. Do you understand that asking for the government to pay you a cost of living allowance for the United Kingdom whilst you were still residing in Sydney might appear to be inappropriate?
Oh, I think if you took it out of context, it might. But I gave you the context in my statement.
Sure.
And that is that and I'm happy to go through it again, Mr. Mookie.
No, it's okay. I'll give you the opportunity to respond to that, but you are right to say you did provide extensive evidence in this in your extensive opening statement.
And it provides the context of me being asked to modify the agreed package that I was offered, that being a straight $600,000 a year salary. I was asked to do a favour to Investment New South Wales to break it up so they didn't have to go to the remuneration tribunal. So it was an artificial construct. It wasn't a UK allowance at all. It was a $600,000 package that was artificially broken up into 2 parts. And therefore, it really was something that I had expected, because that was part of the agreement I had with Ms. West. When she asked me to do the favour in the first place, I said, I'm fine, you can categorise it however you want to categorise it, but at the end of the day, I still expect to get paid that amount every month. And she said, understood, thank you for your cooperation.
But do you accept that one of the reasons it was an artificial construct was because of the discussions you'd had with the Deputy Premier, the agreement between the Deputy Premier and the Treasurer about the conditions and their willingness to be flexible that had set your expectations? That's why this had to be artificially constructed to fit in with public sector expectations.
I accept the fact that the ultimate package that was offered to me would have required an application to the Remuneration Tribunal to approve, and that by breaking it up this way, it made life easier for Investment New South Wales. I can't in any way connect that to my first coffee conversation with the Deputy Premier, which was the only conversation that I'd had.
You make the point in your opening statement in this matter and in other matters to do with your employment that you felt it was necessary to, or at least you were happy to discuss your concerns with Amy, Tim and the Premier. Can I ask, why did you think that you had a relationship with Gladys Berejiklian which meant that you could ask her to weigh in on a matter, look, to be frank, as minor as this in the middle of a pandemic?
It's a wrong characterisation with respect, Mr. Mookie. If you read it carefully, what I said in that email, it was basically saying, if you don't have the authority to agree to some of these things, I'm happy to have the conversation with somebody in the authority chain who does.
But you mentioned the Premier directly. And I'm asking you...
Well, I don't know.
Why did you feel...
I didn't know how high up you had to go in order to get authority to agree to things.
But look, sure, accepting that, right? That's fine. You didn't know how high you had to go up, but you clearly felt that you had a relationship with Premier Berejiklian, which meant that in the middle of a pandemic, you could call her up to ask her to weigh in on a remuneration dispute. What I'm trying to understand is why did you have that expectation?
I didn't have the expectation, and I didn't suggest any such thing. I said, if it's necessary, I'm happy to discuss it with anybody in the authority chain who wants me to explain why I'm asking for a particular provision or a particular change or a particular modification. I didn't know who that was, but I'm saying I'm happy to talk to whoever it was.
Just to be clear here, look, again, I'm not going to push it too much further, but do you understand that regardless of your intentions, that name-dropping the Premier, the Secretary of DPC, in a context like this might appear to be quite threatening to a public servant?
Never having worked for government before, it may be more obvious to people who are in the public service than it was to a private sector person at the time. Because in the private sector, and I remember I was a CEO of large companies for 2 decades, if there was a negotiation for a senior executive who was coming in, and the person handling that negotiation didn't feel they had the authority, it would not be unusual for that to be escalated further up the authority level to the point where even me as CEO or even the chairman might get involved in that conversation to seek to understand what the senior executive needed in terms of agreeing to join. This is not unusual.
Okay.
And I know it's being characterised as something that it wasn't. It was simply me saying, I don't know who in your authority chain has to deal with this, but I'm happy to explain myself.
It is unusual in the public sector, Mr. Cartwright. This is an independent process, independent public sector process. I accept one of the reasons you may have been confused is because your first contact with that independent public sector process was not the recruitment firm, but was the Deputy Premier. I can see why that would have caused some confusion. Do you accept that this is unusual in the public sector, knowing what you know now?
Yes, and let me say that I had assumed that given how important the role of the Agent General in London, Europe and Israel was, that it would make absolute sense that the senior ministers in the government would want to make sure that they had the right person and that person was equipped to do the job. So there was an assumption on my part that there was an active interest from the ministerial level of government in making sure that the person that they sent across to this part of the world represented them properly and therefore was a person of sufficient calibre and capability to do the job. So in my mind, I guess I conflated the public sector and the ministerial arm of government with all having a vested interest in making sure that this was concluded and the right person was sent.
Thank you.
So when you come to these things from the outside, it's not as clear as it perhaps is if you've been raised inside government where you understand the delicacies of these matters.
I appreciate that, Mr. Cartwright, and to be fair to you, that's not an unreasonable assumption to draw after you've had a conversation with the Deputy Premier. But let's move forward. We established earlier this year that there was concerns around effectively the fringe benefit tax liability that would accrue to either you or the state. I'm not going to canvass those matters too much because, to be fair, your evidence in your opening statement on that was very helpful. in that respect. But one of the points you do make in your opening statement is that you directly contacted Stuart Ayres about this as well. Did you say in that message to Stuart Ayres words which included all other AGs and federal government execs have rent, car and school fees covered by the government? And equally, did you say that WA government is paying $13,000 per month rent? That's more than my entire net salary. Did you also say, I have had 2 offers for CE roles back in Sydney, but I would rather stay here and deliver for New South Wales, but I can't live here for 3 years without an apartment that can accommodate my family, at least on school holidays, as the school fees here are twice that of Knox? Did you say that?
I did, and it was very disturbing to me that the place where my children go to school was allowed to be published in the newspapers.
So, and again, Mr. Picard, I respect the fact that as a parent you have an obligation to your children. But do you understand that the way in which you described that conversation with Mr. Ayres in your opening statement isn't perhaps the complete picture?
No, I don't understand that.
Okay. But do you also understand that going directly to a minister in March of this year, which is sometime after you've joined the public service, to a reasonable person would be highly inappropriate? I mean, I've never come
Two things I'll
across...
say about that.
Yep.
Two things I'll say about that, Mr. Mookie. The first is the minister invited me to reach out to him and gave me his mobile number in case I ever needed to, and it got to the point where my relocation allowance had run out. I was desperately trying to secure a property to live in, and there was just nothing coming out of my department in terms of one minute they would say, yes, we're paying you rent. Then it would be, oh, hang on a minute, we've changed our mind. Then I got to a point where I said, there's got to be a game breaker here somewhere. So I was given the offer to contact the minister if ever I needed to. So I thought this is one of those situations. But I'll add to that, Mr. Mookie, something else. And that is that on the 28th of September, I received an email from Ms. Brown, which advised me that Cabinet had decided to adopt an alternative approach to the appointment of the Agent General, involving the drafting of legislation so that the appointments of the Agent General and the New South Wales Commissioners would be made by the Minister of Trade. She then went on to say, we expect your existing conditions will be grandfathered to this new arrangement, and we're going to have meetings between the CEO of Investment New South Wales, Minister for Trade, which was the minister that I wrote to, over the coming weeks to work out the legislative arrangements and the transition. And we have a number of those meetings lined up over the next few days.
Do you mind tabling that email, Mr. Cartwright?
I'll seek approval to do that, which is what I'm instructed to do, Mr. Mookie. I'm instructed
Sure.
that
if you want to take that on notice, if you can take that on notice.
I'll take it on notice.
Yeah.
But let me say to you that I have never received any communication that counteracts this email.
Sure, and that's fair to you, Mr.
So
Cartwright.
on the 28th of September, I was told that within weeks there would be meetings lined up to change our employment arrangements to be that of ministerial appointments.
I appreciate
So you
that, Mr.
need to
Cartwright.
put...
I do appreciate that,
need to
Mr.
put
Cartwright. We have looked at that matter, but I did want to ask you, did Minister Ayres ever come back to you?
No.
Did you ever have any discussions with Minister Ayres about your arrangements whatsoever?
No.
Did you ever have any discussions with any minister about salary sacrificing arrangements for rent or school fees this year?
Not that I recall.
I want to be very clear here, Mr. Cartwright. I'm going to ask you again. Did Stuart Ayres come back to you and reply to your email?
Not that I remember, because I remember the next thing that happened was I was advised there was a benchmarking report produced.
But I also want to be
So
very clear here. Did Stuart Ayres or any other minister ever say to you that you could reach an arrangement about school fees that are similar to the arrangement that was struck about rent?
No, never did any minister say that to me, no.
You'd be very clear here. No minister ever made it very clear to you that school fees could be dealt with the same way as we are dealing with rent.
Correct.
Absolutely
minister
no
ever
way.
did.
Never happened.
Absolutely not.
Not this year.
Never happened.
Not from
No, not
16
any year.
June thereabouts.
No.
No conversations.
Nope.
Can you turn to page 96 of the tender bundle?
Yes.
Just let me know when you're there.
Sorry, what was it? 96?
96 of the tender bundle.
Yes.
You can see this is an email you sent to Amy Brown on the 16th of June 2022, which is 5 days before the budget and 2 days before the day before the announcement, I think, of Mr. Barilaro's appointment as well. This is what you say in the highlighted section.
Yes.
The second relates to the specific clause that rules out applying a similar salary sacrifice structure to school fees should my family move to London permanently. You will recall that the Minister was very clear that school fees could be dealt with the same way as we are dealing with the rent, so this clause caused me some concern. However, I have been reassured by Kylie that the Minister did in fact approve this, so if my family do permanently relocate, we can do another similar variation agreement to cover for fees once the quantum of the fees are known. Mr. Cartwright,
Yes.
this isn't an ancient email. This is from 3 months ago. It makes it
Yes.
very clear that you are having a discussion with a minister that was made it very clear to you that school fees could be dealt with the same arrangement. On top of that, you say you've been reassured by Kylie that the minister did in fact agree to approve this. Now I'm going to take you to page 86
Yep.
of the tender bundle. This is an email that you send on the 9th of June 2022 to Kylie Bell. Its subject is contract variation. You can see you say, "Hi Kylie, I look forward to hearing back from Will on the operative date issue. Also, you and I discussed the opportunity for the school fees to be paid via the same salary sacrifice method as the rent if they moved over and went to school here. I recall that the minister agreed to this." That's the second incidence in which you're invoking the name of a minister in this respect.
Yes.
And also,
Yes.
to be fair to Miss Bell, if you go to page 92, she replies to your email. And she said on the 12th of June 2022, she says, "However, as agreed next year, if the children are with you in the UK and you require us to pay schooling directly from your base salary as agreed, a new letter will be issued with specific amounts for school fees, and your base salary will be further reduced by the same amount." Now, Mr. Cartwright,
Yes.
there are a few
Yes.
issues which I'm going to ask you to respond to. First, it looks as though you misled us. Secondly, it looks as though you were having repeated discussions with ministers about school fees. Third, you were invoking the names of those ministers in these conversations with Kylie Bell. And fourth, the result of that is apparently we've struck a secret arrangement with you in which we will repeat the arrangement for school fees that we entered into when it comes to rent. That's what this chain of correspondence seems to indicate. So I'm going to invite you to revisit your evidence.
No, I don't need to revisit my evidence, Mr. Mookie, because both of the references to what the minister said were simply things that were relayed to me in relation to my requests.
From who? Who relayed it to you?
From memory, it was Kylie Bell.
Sorry. You're telling me that Kylie Bell told you that she had a conversation with the minister in which they agreed on a salary sacrifice arrangement?
No, I'm not saying that she had a discussion with the minister. I'm saying that that she advised me that that was the minister's view on these matters, because what concerned me was that we hadn't yet got to the point of figuring out about the school fees, and I had raised with Kylie my concern that the draft of the variation to my employment contract made it very specifically clear that this was the rent issue was the beginning and the end of the entire conversation, and no more correspondence would be entered into. And I went back to Kylie and I said, well, that's not what I understood was the outcome.
Mr. Cartwright,
and she said,
that doesn't seem to be true, because the email that I just took you to at first instance isn't Miss Bell telling you, it's you reminding Miss Bell. It says you will recall that the minister was very clear that school fees could be dealt with.
yeah.
I mean,
She would recall that because that's what I was told.
So when did Miss Bell tell you that she had some discussion with minister? Did she identify which minister she was having this discussion with?
She didn't tell me that she'd had a discussion with the minister. I think she was getting her information secondhand as well.
Well, Mr. Cartwright, can I just put it to you that actually your email chain is much more accurate than your evidence? That you were in some form of discussion with ministers, you invoked that when it comes to school fees, and you again put pressure on public servants to deliver an arrangement that apparently you felt you had with a minister.
Mr. Mookie, you're absolutely 100% wrong. I never had any conversation with any minister about these issues. I was simply reflecting back what I had been told and wanted to understand why what I had been told and what was in the draft variation to the employment contract were different when it came to the future opportunity to have a similar arrangement for school fees.
Well, let me just
That's all I was
conclude with
saying.
this.
Mr. Mookie,
Let me just
your last
conclude.
question.
Let me just conclude with this. Given that Ms. Bell has confirmed as of 12th of the June that there is some agreement now around
Yes,
your base salary, has it been agreed
yes.
that should you find yourself in a situation where you need to meet school fees in the UK if your children decide to go to school there, that we will be reducing your base salary and a new letter will be issued with specific amounts for fees, and your base salary would further reduce by the same amount and a new letter issued confirming the specifics? Have you entered into this arrangement?
No, we haven't entered into that arrangement, and there's a conflict, Mr. Mookie, between the specific wording of the contract variation, which says that won't occur, and this chain of emails.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. We'll go to questions, I understand, from government members now,
Thank
starting
you
with Mr.
very
Scott
much.
Farlow.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. Just turning to some of the points that have been put to you today with respect to Business New South Wales activities when it came to the last election. Now, that was a campaign around payroll tax, is that correct?
That's correct.
And at the time, the proposal from the then opposition leader was that the payroll tax increase threshold would not be pursued if a Labor government were elected, from 850,000 to 1 million. That was it. Now,
That's correct.
if a Liberal or Nationals policy was to proceed in the same way, I would take it that the Business New South Wales would wage a campaign against the Liberal and National parties as well. Is that correct?
We did so some years earlier when there was a proposal to lift workers' compensation premiums by 12%, and that was a position that was being floated by the Liberal National Party at the time, and the chamber came out vehemently against it because it was going to cost thousands of jobs across the state. That's what being an apolitical organisation means.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. And Mr. Cartwright, turning back to your opening statement as well, you outlined, your significant experience in applying for this role and why others sought you out as a potential candidate. One of those items that you discussed was your international trade consultancy in your opening statement as well. Could you outline perhaps for us some of your experience in that role in negotiating trade and investment for New South Wales in that consultancy role?
So the first thing to understand is that this was a period where the biggest opportunity for exporters in New South Wales was China. Very different environment to today. And a lot of our emphasis and focus was helping New South Wales SMEs enter the China market, which is a difficult market if you're an SME that's never exported there before. There are cultural issues, there are business structure issues, and SMEs feel very intimidated about how to go about that. And Austrade is not really set up to hold the hands of SMEs. And the state government had one person in China at the time, and that they were basically focused on inbound investment only. And so I went to the board of the New South Wales Chamber and asked for a couple of $1 million to set up a trade facility where we could put expert trade people in Shanghai, expert trade people in Sydney, and hold the hand of the SME from the very beginning right through to the successful conclusion of getting orders and filling those orders. And so we helped about 500 businesses through that process. Many of them won new contracts, many of them hired new staff. There was a company in Penrith that had to take on an afternoon shift as a result of the work that we secured for them, and it was a highly successful venture which I'm pleased to say the model that we developed in that consultancy is now the model that is being rolled out by Investment New South Wales around the world. So it's exactly the model that I'm operating here in the UK and Europe, with having our team in Sydney, our team over here, working together to help businesses navigate that, like we did for 15 wineries a couple of weeks ago. So so that's one example. There are lots of others as we help companies to navigate in the Middle East, in Europe, in the Americas. It was a big, important part of the way we're set up to help business.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. And Mr. Cartwright, with that experience and with your observations now, would you say it's important to have boots on the ground in attracting European and UK investment?
I can tell you, having been here since January, that I have no doubt that our absence from this market for 30 years has resulted in New South Wales missing big investment opportunities and big trade opportunities. And I can also tell you that Austrade is not set up to do that, that it absolutely requires state government representation. And that's well understood by the Labor governments in Victoria, in South Australia, in Queensland, in Western Australia. They have agents general here, they have trade staff here. In fact, they have more trade staff around the world than New South Wales does. These are really important roles, and we are rapidly building a pipeline of investment opportunities for New South Wales and trade opportunities for New South Wales.
Thank you, Mr. Cartwright. And on that basis, what's your observations of the footprint that both, all other states effectively have in both the UK and Europe in comparison to New South Wales?
Well, I think now New South Wales is set up to be very competitive, but in London, Victoria would have a larger team than we do, and they're in the process of setting up more staff in Europe. We've recently opened Paris and we've recently opened Berlin, but we only have one person in each of those at the moment. But certainly Victoria are larger than we are in this part of the world.
And Mr. Cartwright, since you've been appointed Agent General, what are some of the achievements you've had in the role?
So what's difficult for people to understand is that I didn't get here until January, and even when I got here, borders were still closed. That makes inbound investment very, very difficult when people who are thinking about investing in New South Wales can't even get on a plane and come and visit. So I arrived here with no office, no staff, no Wi-Fi, no furniture. It was a complete startup. We hadn't been here for 30 years, so there were no CRM, no networks. We'd fallen off everybody's lists. So I had to basically go out and recruit an entire team, which I've now done. We now have a team of experts here in London. The last of those started about 12 weeks ago. We had to rebuild all the relationships, all the networks, set up the CRM, start to build all of those things. And I'm very pleased to say that as a result of all that activity and opening Paris and Berlin in the last few weeks, we've now got active conversations going with around about 50 potential investors, and at least 3 of those are within weeks of being confirmed as successful in investments into New South Wales, and there's a lot more of them to come. But what's critical to understand, and we've secured export opportunities for wine companies and tech companies as well as they come over and we help them. But what's really critical to understand is that we are building the foundations for a long-term success, for a pipeline of opportunities that continues to grow, and you need to put in place the foundations for all of that, and that took some months to put in place. But we really haven't been going that long, and I think we've done a remarkable job in terms of where we've got to and some of the conversations that we're now starting to have about big potential opportunities for New South Wales.
So, Mr. Cartwright, on that point, so what are some of the plans you've got for the future for New South Wales' position when it comes to the UK and European and, of course, Israeli markets?
Well, you have to understand that we're talking about 49 countries. There is no way that we can adequately service 49 countries with 3 offices and about 10 staff. But what we've decided to do is to focus on the 3 largest economies, that being the UK, France and Germany. And then in relation to the other 40-odd countries, to be opportunistic, work with Austrade, and just pick up the opportunities as they come to us, and to intensively focus on the three largest economies in this part of the world. And there are substantial opportunities, particularly in economic transition. So I'm talking about green energy, I'm talking about hydrogen, I'm talking about circular economy. There are lots of companies over here that are looking at Australia, looking at New South Wales. I'll say this, they are being actively courted by Queensland, by Western Australia, by the Northern Territory, by even Tasmania. And New South Wales needs to be here in a big way, putting its best foot forward, putting its case to these companies to say, you should think about New South Wales. Now, bear in mind that places like Western Australia and Queensland actually have a minister for hydrogen. So they are aggressively chasing these opportunities, and it requires people like myself to be having these one-on-one conversations with these companies about the opportunities that New South Wales presents.
Thank you very much. And it was put the other day to Mr Webster with respect to his role with education. He outlined to the committee that that was part of his portfolio. What sort of structure have you got in place in terms of dividing the portfolio interests within the Agent General's office?
So Mr Webster has two direct reports to the two associate directors that look after essentially the opportunities under the free trade agreement. So that's food and beverage, tech, fintech, those sort of areas. The other associate director is the rest of the tech sector. So that's clean tech, reg tech, med tech, biotech. So those two associate directors report to Mr Webster. And then the other 6 staff report to me, or Mr Webster plus the other 5 report to me. So Berlin reports to me, Paris reports to me, the regional office manager reports to me, and the senior director of defence, aerospace and cyber reports to me as well.
And Mr Cartwright, now that borders have opened effectively across the world, except for China and a few other jurisdictions, how much of your role is in the UK and how much is throughout Europe and Israel?
It's regular for me to go to Paris, and in the next month or so we'll also be doing a fair bit in Germany, because we now have a director in Germany who's starting to line up opportunities for us to have meetings in that part of the world as well. So increasingly, as the Paris and Berlin offices get more active, and we are recruiting a second person for the Berlin office as we speak, then I will be spending more of my time in that part of the world. But we also do go to Europe for big conventions. So recently we sent a team across to help New South Wales win the 2025 International Aeronautic Conference, which is now going to be held at the ICC. And I'll say, if it wasn't for my team being involved in that bid, I'm certain Sydney would not have won those hosting rights. So we get involved in those sorts of activities as well. So I would say that at the moment, I'm probably spending about 60% of my time in the UK and about 40% supporting the 2 European offices. But that will sort of vary depending upon what's going on at the time.
Thank you, Mr Cartwright. Now, Mr Cartwright, considering your background as the head of the New South Wales Business Chamber, or Business New South Wales as it's now called, and your role in trade, and of course, as you outlined, heading up one of the largest recruitment organisations as well, how useful do you find that in the role as you get around?
What's really useful in this role, apart from my deep understanding of business throughout the state, is the fact that I actually have first-hand experience in running large companies. During my private sector career, I made about 20-something acquisitions. We raised capital through a venture capital, through an investment bank out of the UK when we were a private firm. As a listed company, I bought overseas companies, private and public. So having that first-hand experience of capital markets, of mergers and acquisitions, of doing business deals, this is really important when you sit down to talk to business people, because you're talking to them in a language that they understand and they know that you understand what they're saying. That's very different if they sit and meet with somebody, for example, who's a career public servant, who's never done those things, who's never been involved in putting those deals together, who doesn't understand things like capital structures and how you might assist them in navigating some of those things.
Thank you, Mr Cartwright. I think that's time for us.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Mr. Cartwright, for again agreeing to appear before the committee today. I believe you were going back to Investment New South Wales in relation to one email that you said you would look to see if you could provide that to the committee. So thank you for that. That's the end of our public hearing, and we will be in touch should we wish to invite you to further hearings as a result of, I understand, more documents that need to be made public. So we'll be in touch with you about that.
Chair, can I just indicate that is likely based on where we are up to, just to be fair to Mr. Cartwright?
Yeah.
Yep.
So thank you, Mr. Cartwright. You'll hear from the Secretariat. That's the end of our hearing for today. Thank you so much.